I've been living out here in the Appalachian Mountains for most of my life, and I always thought I knew what to expect once the sun went down. Coyotes yipping in the distance, maybe a black bear rustling around. Nothing much shakes me. But on this night, everything changed. Let me start by saying my evening had been uneventful, just chores and a quick dinner before midnight rolled around. Jax, my retriever, was curled up by the fireplace like he always is. He's the most relaxed dog on the planet, rarely even barks unless the mailman shows up. That's why I nearly dropped my coffee when I heard this growl coming from him, deep and raw, unlike anything I'd heard before. I glanced at him and saw he was standing rigid, hackles raised, eyes fixed on the window. I couldn't see anything but my own reflection in the glass, and I tried to shrug it off, mumbling something like, "Easy, buddy." But inside I was rattled. I've never seen Jax look that tense, tail stiff, nose practically glued to the window. It was enough to get my heart pounding. Soon, I realized I still had to lock up my workshop down the slope behind the house. Normally this isn't a big deal, just a quick trip in the dark with a flashlight, but the way Jax was acting, let's just say I was on edge. Still, I convinced myself it was no big deal. I grabbed my coat, clicked on the flashlight, and headed out. Jax insisted on coming, practically pressing against my leg with every step. Outside, the air felt strange. I couldn't place why. Maybe it was too still. No crickets, no wind through the branches, just a heavy quiet. Halfway to the workshop, Jax let out another warning growl that made my stomach tighten. Before I could turn on my heel, I noticed the workshop door was slightly open, even though I was sure I'd closed it earlier. My chest felt tight, but I forced myself to keep going. I tugged the door shut and locked it, and that's when this insane commotion erupted in the woods behind me. I can't fully do the sound justice, but it was like a sudden surge of noise tearing through the undergrowth. Branches snapping, leaves crunching, almost like a crowd sprinting among the trees. I froze, and Jax just pressed against me, teeth bared. Whatever caused that ruckus had to be larger than a raccoon or fox. It sounded massive. My hands were shaking so badly that I fumbled with the flashlight, nearly dropping it. I backed up toward the house, trying not to break into a sprint, though my legs were begging me to run. The closer we got to the porch, the more frantic everything felt. I got inside, practically shoved the door shut, and slid the deadbolt into place. My brain was racing, trying to explain what I'd just heard. A bunch of deer. A bear with cubs. But it was so loud, so widespread, like multiple creatures. I stood in the hallway, breath hitching, Jax at my feet, staring at the door. I realized I'd left my pistol upstairs. Adrenaline was making my hands tremble. My pulse hammered as I rushed to my bedroom, grabbed the gun, and made sure it was loaded. I've never felt so desperate to be armed in my own home. Just as I debated whether to investigate or hide, Jax let out a bark. That bark. He only does that when something's seriously wrong. So, against every instinct, I headed back out onto the porch with my flashlight and pistol. My chest was tight, my breathing uneven, but I needed to know if there was an intruder or some animal messing around. I scanned the tree line with the beam. Nothing moved. Silence reigned, almost unnaturally, as though nature itself took a step back, waiting to see what I'd do next. Then, just as I was about to turn and go inside, I heard this low murmur, more like a swarm of hushed voices than a single sound. It came from the very edge of my property, out near where the trees thickened. My stomach dropped. It didn't sound like English, but it was disturbingly close to speech. Jax whimpered, tail tucked, as if he wanted to drag me inside. I couldn't see anything, but it felt like eyes were on me, a presence both everywhere and nowhere. The murmurs seemed to shift direction, echoing out from multiple spots at once. My light swept across the yard, revealing not one silhouette, not one flicker of movement. Yet the voices, if that's what they were, didn't stop. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I thought I might collapse right there on the porch. I forced myself to breathe through it, whispering Jax's name for a shred of comfort. After what felt like ages, I managed to pull myself back inside. That door had never felt so flimsy. I latched it and checked the windows, too spooked to turn on any indoor lights, hoping that darkness would hide me. The night wasn't over, though. I had a terrible feeling this was only the beginning. Like whatever was out there wasn't done with me. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with some random animal. This felt orchestrated, purposeful, and it was tightening around me, step by step. I didn't have a clue what was causing it, but I knew one thing for sure. My home, my safe space, was no longer secure. Jax's instincts had been right from the start, and I dreaded what might be next. I had barely closed my eyes for a second, couldn't rest even if I tried, with every nerve in my body on high alert. Jax was tense, pacing the living room and refusing to leave the front door. I kept the lights off, thinking somehow it would make me less of a target. My phone sat on the table, but out here in the middle of nowhere, good luck trying to call for help. Even if I did get a signal, what could I possibly say to emergency services? Hello, yes, there are voices surrounding my house, and I don't see anyone but my dog is freaking out. That weird muttering from outside seemed to vibrate through the walls, like a low chorus of whispers just behind the wooden panels. It was maddening because I couldn't single out a phrase or identify if it was even human speech. It rose and fell in waves, and every so often it almost sounded like chanting, I guess. I was too rattled to be sure. All I knew was that my gut told me there were multiple presences out there. More than one set of footsteps had circled the house after I first came inside. After another minute of pacing, I finally thought, screw it, I need to see what's happening. I edged over to the window beside my front door, careful not to rustle the curtains. The instant I leaned forward, the noise outside cut off, like someone hit a switch. In its place was the deepest, most all-consuming silence. Not a single insect chirping, no rustle of leaves, just my own ragged breathing. I can't express how unsettling it is to realize that whatever's out there knows when you move. The second I froze, I heard a slight shuffle near the corner of the house. Then that quiet murmuring started back up again, more agitated than before. I grabbed my pistol from the coffee table and quietly approached another window that looked out toward the gravel driveway. Jax followed, ears down and tail stiff, as if he expected an attack. When I shifted the curtain a millimeter, the mumbles faded out again. Something was definitely keyed into every movement I made, and that realization caused my stomach to churn. Time dragged on. I checked my phone. 1:47 a.m. It had only been an hour since I'd first heard that thunderous crashing in the woods, but it felt like half the night had passed. I decided to kill the darkness with a chance at visibility, so I clicked on the porch light. Nothing in the yard, no bodies, no shapes, not even a stray raccoon. My flashlight remained on the table, but I felt no urge to go out there again. A part of me sensed if I opened that door, I'd be swallowed whole. Jax's eyes stayed locked on the windows. Now and then, a single footstep crunched the gravel outside, slow and deliberate. One step, pause. Another step, pause. It was unbearable not to open a window and yell, but I couldn't bring myself to be that reckless. My mind kept thinking back on old stories from my grandparents, about things in the hills that weren't exactly animal and not quite human either. Tales I'd once dismissed as pure folklore. But here I was, feeling cornered by something I couldn't see. To keep myself sane, I jotted notes on a pad. What times I heard the footsteps, what they sounded like, how the whispering seemed to move around the property in a clockwise pattern. Once or twice, I considered switching on music or the TV just to drown it out, but a voice in my head told me to stay alert, not to mask the sounds. After all, if something crashed through the door, I needed to know instantly. Hours crawled by this way. My nerves were shot, my hands clammy, and every muscle ached with tension. I found myself drifting off only to jolt awake seconds later whenever Jax twitched. It was like living on a fault line, expecting the earth to quake at any moment. Meanwhile, the murmurs persisted outside, underscored by that dead silent hush whenever I tried to move. It was a twisted game. They made sure I knew they were there, but not once did I see a face or a form. Sometime around 4:30, or maybe closer to 5 a.m., the tone of the murmuring changed. Hard to explain, but the pitch went lower, almost guttural. Then, slowly, the sound started drifting away, deeper into the woods. I caught faint rustling through the thick brush, then a final few snaps of branches. In their wake, frogs croaked and a couple of birds called. It was as if the natural world had been stifled all night and finally breathed again. Relief washed over me, but it wasn't that comforting. I still felt like I might vomit from the stress. I checked each window for any sign of movement. Nothing. The gravel driveway looked untouched, aside from my own footprints. Jax gradually relaxed, though he wouldn't lie down until the first pale light of dawn crept across the horizon. Once I was fairly certain the immediate threat had disappeared, I stepped outside onto the porch for a breath of air, pistol clutched tight in my hand. The yard was a mess of broken branches, and the lingering smell of disturbed soil clung to the morning breeze. Yet, bizarrely, there were no footprints, no trace of a crowd or gang of animals. The only proof was in my shaking limbs and Jax's raw-edged stare. I spent sunrise going back and forth, mentally replaying each horrifying moment. My place still felt uneasy, like the echoes of those voices might start up again any second. I didn't dare pack up and leave. Part of me needed to know if this was a one-time nightmare or an ongoing threat. I downed 2 cups of coffee, watched the brightening sky, and told myself I'd figure out what to do next. For now, daylight was my only shield, and I was not about to let my guard down. Jax and I sat there in a haunted silence, expecting something to re-emerge, hoping that it wouldn't. Sunrise brought the faintest sense of relief, yet my nerves still buzzed with every stray sound. I locked the doors, sealed every window, and tried to make sense of what had just happened, but nothing about it fit neatly into the realm of normal. Part of me wanted to believe that it was some freak incident, maybe a collective hallucination brought on by stress. Still, the unease in my chest whispered that whatever took up residence in the darkness that night is out there, lurking beyond the edges of reason, waiting for another moment to slip back into my world. For now, I've recounted every detail here, hoping to warn others. Sometimes, the eerie stories we dismiss might be truer than we're willing to admit. I've been drawn to the Appalachian region for as long as I can remember. Something about those towering slopes and shadowy hollows always felt like a gateway into a different world. Beautiful, yet laced with an unsettling aura that's tough to articulate. A few friends and I decided to head out to Holly River State Park in West Virginia, lured by rumors of an old family cemetery hidden up on a ridge. We had only a vague idea of where it might be. All we knew was that we needed to follow a winding trail that cut through dense undergrowth before climbing up toward this rumored graveyard. So the 3 of us piled into my car early that morning, excited by the prospect of a day hike. The drive itself was so quiet that we began making offhand jokes, like something was waiting out there, just beyond view. Maybe it was nerves talking, or maybe I'd had too much coffee. Either way, my stomach churned in that weird way it does when you're both excited and half spooked. When we arrived, the parking lot near the main trailhead had a few vehicles, but we didn't cross paths with any actual people. The entire place seemed deserted. We shrugged, figuring everyone must have already started their morning treks. After all, Holly River is a decently sized park. Folks could be scattered across countless trails. I tried to keep my mind on the gorgeous landscape, moss-covered stones, towering hardwoods, and the occasional chirp of a distant bird. Yet there was this hush underneath it all, like nature had dialed itself down a notch. We kicked off our hike around midday. The sky was overcast, so the light filtering through the branches came in muted silvery patches. The trail was pretty well worn at first, so we made quick progress. The chatter between us died off once we noticed how oddly calm the forest felt. Everything about the place demanded our attention, from the tangled roots underfoot to the looming canopy overhead. Occasionally we'd catch snatches of movement in our peripheral vision, maybe squirrels, but the scuttling always stopped the moment we tried to look closer. My friend commented that it seemed like the place was sizing us up, and nobody argued. We pressed on, climbing steadily. Eventually, we left the official trail in search of that old graveyard. The path we followed was more of a half-remembered rumor than a marked route. A fallen tree forced us to detour through thick brush, and my arms got scratched up enough that I started wishing we'd picked an easier day hike. Still, I couldn't help feeling compelled to keep going. There was a raw, ancient feel to the land that I couldn't let go of. A couple hours in, the terrain turned steep. Loose stones threatened to send us sliding if we weren't careful, and we had to cling to exposed roots for stability. We nearly missed the cemetery altogether, spotting it only because of a warped iron gate that caught the corner of my friend's eye. A row of leaning tombstones stood beyond, the lettering on them faded and chipped. If I didn't know any better, I'd say they'd been here for centuries. Up close, the graveyard gave off an atmosphere that bordered on oppressive. The headstones bore names we could barely read, and the ground was covered in tangled weeds. The three of us wandered, taking pictures and gingerly brushing aside overgrown vines. Every so often, a subtle breeze would move past us, bringing with it a musty odor that reminded me of damp soil and decaying leaves. My pulse was hammering in my ears for reasons I couldn't explain, but I tried to play it cool. We stayed longer than we intended, mostly because we were fascinated, and maybe a little horrified, by the idea that entire families could be buried out here, forgotten by time. Each time the wind picked up, we paused, half expecting something or someone to step out from behind those looming trees. It was all in my head, I told myself, probably just a side effect of being in a graveyard at sunset. By the time we left, the sun had started sliding down the sky, painting the ridge in murky oranges and purples. We hadn't planned on night hiking, but it was creeping up on us fast. The idea of navigating a dark forest trail made our nerves spike, so we decided the park's main road would be safer, even if it was a bit out of the way. We figured it couldn't be more than a few miles to loop around and reach the campground parking lot. Leaving that cemetery felt like stepping away from a forgotten realm. Once we hit a semblance of a trail again, a fragile sense of relief settled over us. But it was short-lived. The path to the road was riddled with roots, slippery patches, and random branches that snagged at our clothes. Little cracks and snaps echoed in the brush, just enough to keep us on edge. We hurried along, willing ourselves not to think about the dark shapes dancing in our peripherals. Finally, we broke free of the tree line and spotted the asphalt up ahead. The sense of relief was almost overwhelming, like stumbling onto a lifeline in the middle of nowhere. But an uneasy vibe still trailed behind us, no matter how hard we tried to shake it. The light was fading fast, and the road itself looked empty in both directions. No cars, no people, nothing. Just a hush that felt downright eerie. That's where the first leg of our journey ended, with us stepping onto that road and peering into the early twilight. Looking back, I realized we had no clue how unsettling the next stretch would be. In the moment, though, we were just grateful to be out of the thick woods. Little did we know, that relief was about to dissolve quicker than we could have imagined. After stumbling out of the tree line, we reached this narrow asphalt road that was supposed to lead us back to the campground. And for a few fleeting moments, we were relieved. No more tripping over roots or scraping our arms on undergrowth. The wind seemed calmer too, though I swear the air felt heavier than it had in the woods. With dusk rolling in, we figured we had maybe 3 miles to cover, tops. But it was eerily quiet. I mean, you'd expect at least a car or two to pass by in a park this size, even late in the day. Instead, we had this winding stretch of road all to ourselves. I remember my friend joking, "We're basically the only people left on Earth," and none of us cracked a real smile. We picked a direction, based on a ragged sign pointing toward the campground, and started walking, the sun melting into the horizon behind us. As we hiked along, the darkness deepened. The trees on either side of us stood like silent onlookers. Every so often, something would stir in the brush, maybe a small critter or a bird, but we never saw anything. That emptiness felt unnatural, like the park itself was waiting for something to happen. We'd covered about half the distance when we spotted the silhouettes. Up ahead, illuminated by the faint remnants of twilight, were at least 5 figures. They were just standing there in the middle of the road, as if they were waiting for us. Relief surged through me for a second, thankful that we weren't the only ones out there. My friend even waved, though none of them waved back. We moved closer, calling out a timid "hey" or two, hoping for some response. Nothing. They were close enough now that I should have been able to make out features, faces, hair color, clothing details. But it was like I could only see the general shape of them, as if the light was playing tricks. The weirdest part was that they didn't make a sound. No conversation, no footsteps shuffling on asphalt. They were just there, like placeholders. Then, without warning, they started to fade. One by one, they flickered in and out until all that remained was a vacant stretch of road. The three of us were rooted in place, trying to process what was happening. We weren't imagining this. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe our eyes were messing with us after the dim forest. Or maybe they just slipped away into the dark. But as we reached the exact spot where we'd seen them, it was clear there was nowhere to go. On one side, a sheer drop fell away into a valley. The other side was a jagged slope of rock that would have been nearly impossible to climb quietly, even in broad daylight. The asphalt itself looked undisturbed, no footprints, no sign of scuffling, not even a stray candy wrapper. Just empty road stretching off into the shadows. A cold sense of dread settled over us. We hung around for a minute, shining phone flashlights and calling out, but nobody answered. The idea of those figures just evaporating forced our tension up several notches. I couldn't tell if we'd witnessed something supernatural, or if my eyes were conspiring against me in the low light. Either way, it triggered a kind of primal fear I haven't felt too often in my life. We finally decided to press on, hearts thumping from the sudden shift in atmosphere. Every step from then on felt like it echoed a little too loudly. We kept glancing back, convinced we'd see the group again, trailing behind us, or maybe popping up ahead. But there was nothing. At one point, I caught a whiff of a faint odor, sort of earthy and decayed, but it was gone as soon as I noticed it. By then, we were moving faster than I'd ever hiked in my life. The final stretch to the campground felt like a fever dream, each of us expecting something horrible to lurch out of the darkness. When we finally caught sight of the campground sign, it was like stepping into another world. Only there weren't any people there either. The entire place was disturbingly quiet, save for the distant rustle of trees. Usually a state park campground has some buzz, campfires crackling, murmured conversations, maybe a dog barking. We got nothing. Our car was right where we left it, sitting in a patch of moonlit gravel. I can't describe how relieved I was to see it. We clambered inside, locking the doors more out of instinct than necessity. Who locks up in a lonely campground? But something about that night made every protective move feel justified. My friend gunned the ignition, and we peeled out, headlights pushing back the darkness a little. That entire drive out of the park, I kept expecting those figures to emerge from the trees or appear in the rearview mirror. Only once we hit the main highway did we dare speak about it in more than whispers. We tossed around ideas, mass hallucination, illusions caused by the fading light, or maybe some group of locals messing with us. Still, none of those explanations explained the silent disappearance act. Days later, every time I closed my eyes, I'd see those silhouettes flicker and vanish like they'd never existed at all. I've heard plenty of stories about weird sightings in the Appalachians, ghostly hikers, phantom lantern lights bobbing through the trees. But until that night, I brushed them off as campfire tales. Now, I'm not so sure. All I know is that something happened on that silent road, and I can't shake the idea that it was a glimpse into the unknown. That's the story of how a simple day trip to Holly River spiraled into a haunting mystery that continues to gnaw at me. Was it some lost echo of the park's past, or did we stumble into something far stranger than we were prepared to handle? Honestly, I still don't have an answer, but there's one thing I can say for sure. The image of those 5 figures dissolving in the twilight is going to stay with me. I guess not every twist in these old mountains needs a tidy explanation. Sometimes it's enough to know that the darkness holds more secrets than we can ever hope to understand. I'm writing this because every time I look back on my experiences out there, I end up pacing around my apartment, uneasy and restless. People love talking about the Appalachian Trail as if it's just scenic overlooks and friendly hikers, but I learned there's a lot more than meets the eye. Before I ever set foot on that route, I was the type of person who devoured paranormal stories. Something about the unknown always grabbed my attention. Maybe it's just human nature to chase mysteries. By the time I started planning my extended trek, I'd convinced myself that I was more prepared than most for whatever I'd find in those ancient mountains. The reality, completely different. I remember my first stretch near Blood Mountain. History loomed around every bend, not just from the Civil War sites, but from the remnants of tribal conflicts that went on long before European settlers showed up. The ground felt worn in a way that's tough to put into words, like it had absorbed centuries of voices. A couple of nights in, I decided to camp alone in a spot where the trees formed a thick canopy, letting in only patches of moonlight. The moment I unrolled my sleeping gear, I noticed that the usual night chorus, crickets, distant owls, had faded. There was an odd sensation of being watched from multiple angles. My mind started to wander, and I ended up lying awake far longer than I wanted. The strange part is, I was positive I spotted movements where there shouldn't have been any, silhouettes flitting at the periphery of my headlamp's glow. Once or twice, I had the distinct impression of a figure standing behind a distant trunk, dressed in something that didn't fit modern times. I never got a clear look, but that sense of stepping across some invisible threshold kept me wired until sunrise. A few weeks later, I ventured closer to Harper's Ferry, where you can literally walk among the traces of the Civil War trenches. One late afternoon, as the light shifted from gold to a dull gray, I saw a person in old-style military gear drifting along a sunken path. My brain tried to rationalize. Maybe it's a reenactor, maybe I was exhausted, but the person, or whatever it was, vanished almost instantly. The spot fell silent, like everything around had decided to pause. For a second I questioned if I was alone in that corridor of battered earth. It left me on edge for the next several days, scanning every ridgeline in case something else appeared. But nothing compares to the night a bear and I had our awkward confrontation. I'd rigged up a hammock between two sturdy trunks and dozed off, lulled by the distant rustling. At some unknown hour, a firm prod against my back startled me awake. I reacted without thinking, twisting around and striking with my hand. I connected with fur and realized in horror it was a bear's muzzle. Adrenaline shot through me as I waited for it to decide if I was more trouble than I was worth. Instead, it crashed off through the brush, leaving me stunned and trying to slow my breathing. The rest of that evening, every single noise made me tense up, braced for a second round that, thankfully, never came. Funny thing is, when I mention this to people, they usually fixate on the bear encounter. They don't realize that animals, wild as they might be, don't compare to the unsettling presence that seems embedded in parts of this trail. That feeling of history refusing to let go, those fleeting glimpses of things wearing outdated clothes, the heavy atmosphere around certain places. It's all there, woven into the land. I'd tell myself these experiences were just the product of fatigue. Maybe I'd just been reading too many ghost stories. Yet something nagged at me, like I'd stumbled onto a realm where the past occasionally slips through the cracks. Later, in Pennsylvania, I'd discover what true dread can feel like. That, however, is a story for another post, one that still keeps me alert at odd hours, replaying every step I took through that long, dark night. I thought I'd seen the worst of the trail. Run-ins with spooky silhouettes and a half-asleep confrontation with a bear had me convinced I was prepared for anything. Turns out, Pennsylvania wanted to prove me wrong. After crossing the state line, I remember feeling oddly optimistic. The weather was pleasant enough, and I decided to sleep under the stars rather than set up any shelter. The sky was so clear earlier that evening, and I wanted to experience the open air for once. I laid out my sleeping pad and got comfy in my bag, surrounded by trees and that faint hum of nighttime insects. Eventually, I drifted off. Sometime past midnight, I woke up with my heart thumping. The night had gone dead silent, which rattled me. Normally, you'd at least hear a hooting owl or wind rustling the branches. Instead, a thin, eerie whine reverberated all around. It was so soft, like it was trying not to exist, but it also seemed inescapable. Every instinct told me I shouldn't remain there. My breathing felt tight, and the air felt heavier than usual, as if some invisible presence had crept in and settled on top of me. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that it might just be the wind through the leaves or some small animal. Yet the whine didn't change pitch, didn't shift direction, didn't do anything I'd label as normal. The dread in the pit of my stomach wasn't something I could shrug off. Within minutes, I was shoving gear back into my pack, fumbling for my headlamp. It took every ounce of willpower not to panic and run blindly through the dark. The moment I found the trail markers and started moving, the heaviness slowly eased. After maybe half a mile, the sensation broke, like stepping out of a dense fog. The noise faded into nothingness, and I stood there, leaning on a tree, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to turn back, search for some logical explanation. The rest of me argued that I should get as far from that spot as possible. In the end, I kept going. Even now, I haven't made sense of what happened, or what was possibly lurking in that empty patch of forest. A few days later, a storm caught me and a group of through hikers near Mount Rogers. Rain hammered the metal roof of a simple shelter, thunder rolling across the sky. We were soaked, shivering, and half-starved. Someone remembered that a local pizza place would deliver to the parking lot if you sweet-talked them enough. The idea of hot food and maybe a six-pack had us pooling whatever money we had left. After a tense wait, lightning flickering in the distance, we spotted headlights. Naturally, we figured our food had arrived. Several of us shuffled out into the downpour, layered in soaked clothes, boots caked in mud, hair plastered to our faces. We must have looked like a nightmare. The driver saw us coming and slammed on the high beams. Tires screeched, reverse lights glowed bright red, and the van spun around so fast we all stood there in confusion. We watched the vehicle vanish back down the road, fishtailing like it was desperate to escape. We exchanged baffled looks, water dripping down our faces, and laughed nervously. Some of the group started joking. Maybe we seemed like forest ghouls or something. 5 minutes later, like clockwork, a different car pulled up, and this time, the driver hopped out, completely unfazed. Apparently he was the real pizza guy, used to hikers in all their rain-soaked glory. He handed over hot pizza boxes, a few cans of cheap beer, and chuckled about us looking like zombies. I can only guess what the first driver's story would be afterward, how a band of unholy creatures approached his van in the middle of nowhere at night. In those moments, I realized that the Appalachian Trail doesn't just feed on spooky legends. Sometimes, genuine comedy and confusion overshadow the fear. Yet, for all the laughs we shared over that botched pizza delivery, I still had the memory of that unsettling whine in Pennsylvania fresh in my head. I couldn't help but wonder if I'd only scratched the surface. The trail has this way of revealing its secrets when you least expect it. One minute you're joking around, dripping wet, begging for food. The next, you're bolting from an unexplainable force in the dead of night. Even now, I look back at Pennsylvania and feel a pang of discomfort. Whatever I sensed out there, whatever generated that unearthly noise, made me think there are places along the trail better left alone, maybe forever. And yet part of me can't resist the pull to keep exploring, half expecting to stumble onto some ancient mystery that refuses to stay buried. Guess that's the real paradox of the Appalachian Trail. It draws you in with beauty, then leaves you with questions that linger night after night. I was closing in on Duncannon, feeling that mix of exhaustion and excitement that comes when you're too far gone to turn around, but not quite close enough to celebrate. About 10 miles out, I spotted a small group of older women huddled around a couple of picnic tables near the trail. They waved me over with warm smiles, so I joined them to rest my legs a bit. They asked if I was a through hiker, and seemed genuinely thrilled about my progress. We traded a few stories. I told them where I started, how many states I'd already trudged through. It felt like your average friendly chatter until they asked where I was sleeping that night. Soon as I mentioned some older shelter a few miles shy of town, their energy shifted. One of them said, "You should really head into Duncannon tonight," while another repeated the advice, adding nothing else, just the same warning. None of them spelled out why, and I remember thinking, are they worried about the weather or something? But their eyes had this urgency, like they knew something I didn't. I tried to press them for details, but they brushed it off, insisting it'd be better if I pushed on to town. My pack was heavy, and my feet were screaming at me, so heading all the way in felt like an extra challenge. Their unease was contagious, though. As I said my goodbyes, that tension they carried clung to me like a damp chill. By late afternoon, I found myself turning off the main stretch of the Appalachian Trail, following a steep side path toward the shelter. The slope was trickier than I expected, with old roots and loose stones that had me stumbling more than once. Overhead, the light was already starting to fade behind thick branches. Normally, I'd be okay with a few hours of dusk hiking, but something about that place just felt heavy. Eventually, I reached two battered structures that I knew from my guidebook were built by Earl Schaffer. He was basically AT royalty, having been the first person to ever hike the entire trail in one go. The shelters looked ancient, sagging in spots, and the musty boards gave off a whiff of age and rot. Nearby was a new shelter under construction, and even from a distance, I noticed carved faces on the beam ends. They peered out in a way I couldn't quite describe, like silent observers in the dying light. I could have stayed in the half-finished shelter, but it seemed even more unsettling with those carved heads, so I stuck to one of the old ones. Inside, the shelter's floor was just round logs placed side by side, barely lifted off the ground. It made for a pretty uneven sleeping surface. I figured I'd seen worse. This was the AT after all. But something about that rickety setup gave me an odd sense of discomfort. I tried to focus on other things. Next day's mileage, where I'd get water, a possible 0 day in Duncannon. But whenever I paused, that prickly awareness returned, like I wasn't alone. I kept glancing around, seeing nothing but old wood, leaves, and a few spiders skittering in the corners. I made dinner quickly, more to keep my hands busy than anything. Every so often, a gust of wind would whistle through the beams, and the shelter groaned like it had a voice of its own. My mind flicked back to the women at the picnic tables. Why were they so insistent I shouldn't be here? The question nagged at me, but without a concrete reason, I brushed it off as local superstition or overprotection. Night fell harder than usual, it seemed. The woods beyond the shelter entrance looked like a solid wall of black. My headlamp beam danced around, catching the edges of rocks and roots outside, but I couldn't shake the weirdness. I tried to sleep, but my senses stayed on high alert. Sometimes a crack of a branch snapped me awake, or a rustle of movement made me think there was someone, or something, lurking beyond the circle of light. When morning finally arrived, the relief I felt was intense. Packing up, I almost sprinted up that trail, my body protesting the sudden climb, but my mind demanding we get moving. With each step, the weight of the place seemed to lessen, replaced by fresh air and the promise of Duncannon's comforts. Still, I couldn't completely shake a lingering unease, like I'd just crawled out from under a dark cloud. It wasn't until I reached town, found a phone, and updated my mail drop contact that I got slapped in the face with the real story. I mentioned that shelter, offhandedly describing it as seriously creepy. That's when she told me about the two hikers. They'd been southbounders, having a friendly chat with a random bar patron in Duncannon. Later that night, this same patron had followed them to that very shelter, waited until they were asleep, and murdered them. Hearing it made my stomach twist, replaying every odd vibe I'd felt, every unsettling sound during the night. Those women at the picnic tables had tried to warn me, but they couldn't bring themselves to say why out loud. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, knowing now what happened in those walls. It was more than just an old shelter. It was a crime scene, a place stained by something monstrous. If I had known, would I still have slept there? Maybe not. But the thought of it being so close to where two people lost their lives shifted the trail in my mind. The wilderness wasn't just bears and storms. It could hold human darkness too. And I had just walked right into it. I came back to that stretch of the trail a few years later. I hadn't really planned on returning. There was a part of me that wanted to avoid that entire area after learning what had gone down at the old shelters. But life and my hiking routes had a funny way of circling back on themselves. Before I knew it, I was standing at the same cutoff from the main trail, peering down the slope with this knot in my stomach. The trees here looked familiar, yet different, maybe older or scarred by storms. Sunlight trickled through the canopy in thin beams, and a low breeze made the branches sway. I swear it felt like the forest was reminding me, we remember what happened here. Going down that path, I half expected to see the two old shelters just as they'd been. My memory was vivid, those ramshackle logs, the musty smell, the new shelter mid-construction with the carved faces. But when I reached the bottom, I was greeted by an entirely changed scene. The two ancient structures had been torn out, no trace but a few piles of splintered wood near the edge of the clearing. Instead, the new shelter stood proudly in their place, fully completed. The carved faces I'd glimpsed years ago were still there, only now smoothed by weather, or maybe by countless hikers running their hands along them. They seemed less like art and more like watchful eyes. I hesitated, feeling a swirl of relief that the murderous old shelters were gone, mixed with a weird nostalgia for the original version of the place, even if it had been dangerously creepy. As I moved closer, I noticed someone sitting on the newly built porch, sipping from a battered canteen. He wore a bandana and looked like he'd seen a lot of trail miles. When he looked up, I nodded a greeting, and he waved me over. We got to talking, as hikers do. Turns out he'd thru-hiked the trail a few years back, and had come out for a weekend getaway. It wasn't long before we drifted into the subject of the area's grim history. Apparently, there was a formal dedication ceremony once the new shelter was finished, and from what he'd heard, Earl Schaffer himself had been there, only to be brushed off or overshadowed by certain officials. Folks who didn't get the depth of his contribution, or maybe just didn't care. Hearing that made me bristle. Earl had literally shaped part of the trail's legacy, these shelters, the story of the first thru hike, and it hurt to imagine him being sidelined. The conversation took a darker turn when we ventured into the topic of those murders. My companion knew about them too, of course. Everyone who's hiked this area for long enough picks up the rumors, if not the exact details. But he also mentioned how, despite the tragedy, folks in town tried to move on. The new shelter was supposed to symbolize a fresh start, a safe space for hikers passing through. Only, he said, some people believed the land itself still felt tainted, as though the violence of that night hadn't just vanished when the old shelters got ripped out. "Have you felt it?" he asked me, eyes locked onto mine. "That heavy quiet?" I gave a slow nod, remembering the sensation of dread from my own first night here. We both fell into silence, broken only by the rustle of wind and the distant babble of a creek. Eventually, he packed up and left, heading back toward town. I hung around a bit, taking in the new shelter. It looked perfectly ordinary from the outside, just sturdy beams, a proper roof, and enough space to fit a handful of hikers. But those carved faces unnerved me. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I could have sworn they were almost aware, as if they'd seen more than they let on, listening for footsteps in the night. Later on, I found myself walking north again. The trail was peaceful, the kind of gentle climb that usually empties my mind of worries. Only this time, my thoughts kept drifting back to what had happened there. I wondered if a fresh coat of wood and a brand new name could really erase the memory of two hikers who'd never made it out. A piece of me doubted it. A few weeks down the line, I came across Pierce Pond Shelter in Maine. Beautiful spot, picturesque pond, vibrant autumn colors. But the instant I got there, I felt a pang of that same uneasy tension I'd experienced in Pennsylvania. It wasn't rational. There was no recorded tragedy I knew of, no creeping murderer lurking behind a pine tree. Still, the place had this hush, like it was waiting for something. I tried shaking it off, chalking it up to hiker paranoia or lingering trauma from that other shelter. Yet, As the sun dipped below the pines, the atmosphere felt suffocating. Every rustle outside set my nerves on edge. That's when I started to wonder if it was me, if I was carrying this darkness from shelter to shelter, replaying it in every unfamiliar corner of the trail. The thought alone was enough to keep me wide awake, scanning for silhouettes in the dark. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off, but not peacefully. In the morning, the chill still clung to me. I realized it's not as simple as a single terrible event in one place, or some new construction replacing old bones. The trail might be full of kind souls and breathtaking sights, but it can also trap echoes of the worst moments experienced by those who walked it. The deeper truth is that no matter how many signs we put up or improvements we make, history has a nasty habit of haunting whatever ground it clings to. I left Pierce Pond Shelter feeling a little more shaken, a little more aware of how quickly these woods can go from comforting to unnerving. And as I hiked on, the thought kept circling in my head. The real danger out here isn't always the wildlife or the elements. Sometimes it's the people you cross paths with and the echoes they leave behind, long after they're gone. Be careful out there. I'd planned on taking it easy that evening, maybe practice a few fishing knots, or help Grandpa Morley tidy up the workshop. Instead, a couple of friends, Ray and Kelsey, coaxed me into one last round of our favorite hide-and-seek style game. It was something we'd concocted years ago, chasing each other through every nook and cranny of the Appalachians behind Grandpa's homestead. Funny how you can grow up around these hills and still feel like you've barely scratched the surface of what's out there. The house sits at the base of a ridge that rises into dense hardwood forests. Grandpa always said the land has its own memory, that every gust of wind and snap of twigs might be a signal if you listen closely enough. I laughed it off whenever he got too mystical, but tonight I was starting to see where he might have been coming from. The three of us were in the yard, the western sky burning orange where the sun dropped behind the ridgeline. Kelsey decided she'd be it this time, so Ray and I scampered toward the slope. We both had camouflage jackets, more fashion statement than functional gear, but I like to think it helped us blend in. The plan was to outsmart Kelsey by moving uphill. She'd never guess we'd take the steeper path. Or so we thought. We crested that slope, and the first thing I noticed was how quiet the forest had become. Usually this time of evening, you can hear crickets winding up for their nighttime chorus, maybe an owl calling in the distance. That night, it felt like everything paused, waiting. Ray and I tucked ourselves into a shallow dip in the ground, just behind a line of scraggly bushes. We had a clear view of the yard, though it was getting dim. Kelsey's flashlight beam danced across the grass below, and we congratulated ourselves on the perfect hiding spot. All we had to do was lie low until she gave up. Easy enough. A moment later, a low, rhythmic pulse reached us, like a drumbeat echoing from far off. Ray's head jerked up. I glanced at him, wondering if he felt it too, that buzzing in the pit of my stomach. Drums in this part of the mountains? Maybe a local gathering, though it made zero sense for it to suddenly start after dusk. The sound grew. The beat became something more than a lone drum, chanting or singing, weaving in. And accompanying everything, a melody that shouldn't fit any of it. A high, keening note, reminiscent of bagpipes. That unexpected note stirred something protective in me, like I needed to stand up and figure out who was out there. Except, stepping forward was the last thing I wanted to do. The music peaked, reverberating through the trees, each note rippling across the slope. Ray and we just stared at each other, neither wanting to speak out loud. Even whispering felt too risky, as if we'd draw unwanted attention. My lungs begged for a deep breath, but I tried not to make a sound. Then it died away, gone in half a heartbeat. The sudden lack of noise rang in my ears more than the drumbeat did. I couldn't bear another second of stillness. Ray must have felt the same because he jerked his head downhill, eyes wide. We both sprang up, stumbling over that ridge. Gravity did half the work, sending us skidding down faster than we intended. A root snagged Ray's foot, nearly toppling him. I grabbed his sleeve, and we both regained balance long enough to lurch down into the yard. Kelsey didn't need an explanation. She stood frozen near the house's floodlight, face pale with confusion. Grandpa stepped onto the porch, an old lantern in one hand, eyebrows knit. We didn't offer much beyond a frantic, "We heard something weird." Even saying that felt like an understatement. Inside the house, we slammed the door behind us, hearts hammering. Grandpa told us to sit, voice firm but calm, and started asking questions. Ray tried to describe the chanting and the bagpipes, while I stared out the window, half expecting more noise to erupt from the hills. But everything beyond the floodlit yard was black, mute. Eventually, Grandpa checked his radio to see if there were any announcements. Some festival, a big group camping, a local event that might explain away the noise. Nothing came through. He frowned, as if something he'd worried about was stepping into reality. He suggested we all stick close, even though part of me wanted to bolt for my truck and drive into the nearest town. We ended up huddling in the living room, not saying much. Each time the house creaked with night settling in, we jerked our heads toward the windows. Part of me thought I was overreacting. The other part said I couldn't be too careful. At one point, Kelsey started describing how it sounded almost ceremonial. Ray kept mentioning the bagpipes, how out of place they felt in these mountains. Grandpa just listened in silence, like he was adding up bits of a puzzle we couldn't see. And so we waited for dawn, adrenaline coursing so hard that sleep didn't stand a chance. Whatever we heard out there, it didn't feel like an accidental jam session. It had the determined rhythm of something bigger, something we weren't meant to stumble upon. I glanced through the window one more time, across that slope where the silhouette of bare branches seemed to watch us back. The night had only just begun, and I was afraid it wasn't done revealing whatever secrets lay in those woods. Morning light had a way of making the previous night feel like a fever dream. But when I opened my eyes, the knot in my gut told me it wasn't just an overactive imagination. Ray was already awake, pacing in front of the fireplace. Kelsey sipped coffee at the window, staring off at the slope where we'd heard that eerie music. The house felt tense, like we were all braced for whatever might come next. Grandpa Morley was digging through his old field notebooks, scattering them across the kitchen table. He murmured to himself as he flipped pages, sometimes tapping a map he'd pinned down with an empty coffee cup. Finally, he called us over. "This area right here," he pointed at a forested patch just beyond the ridge. "I've heard stories about folks finding strange footprints, hearing unexplainable sounds. Never had solid proof, but no shortage of rumors." Ray wanted answers. He kept talking about how that chanting still echoed in his ears. Kelsey looked as though she wanted to crawl under a blanket and forget everything. But Grandpa said if we wanted peace of mind, we had to see what was out there in the daylight. I wasn't exactly thrilled, but curiosity gnawed at me. The only way to settle my nerves was to confront whatever was lurking in those trees. We followed the same path as the night before, only this time, sunbeams cut through the canopy. The forest felt awake now, birds calling overhead, the smell of wet leaves underfoot. My boots squelched in the soft soil. About 20 minutes in, we spotted footprints in the mud near an old game trail. More than one set, too. Some were big enough that I wondered if a whole group had come through. Kelsey knelt down, tracing the edges with her fingertips. She didn't say a word, but her expression told me she was unsettled. As we pressed deeper, a low clearing opened up. In the center were stones stacked in a wide circle. The ground was littered with scorched branches, as if a fire had burned there recently. I kicked at a pile of ash, uncovering what might have been animal bones. Nearby, Ray found shredded fabric snagged on a sharp branch, checkered like tartan. The breath caught in my throat. Bagpipes, a Scottish pattern, and those drum rhythms. None of it added up, but it sure felt connected. Before we could piece things together, that same beat thrummed in the distance. All three of us froze, and every nerve I had went on high alert. The chanting returned, and with it came a deeper, resonating drumbeat that rattled through the trees. We ducked behind an uprooted trunk, peering over as shadows flickered beyond the bushes. I saw multiple figures moving, at least 5 or 6, too many to count accurately. One carried what looked like a bagpipe under an arm. Another brandished a tall staff decorated with dangling bits of cloth or feathers. It felt like we'd trespassed on a hidden ceremony. My pulse roared in my head, urging me to get moving. Ray tugged my jacket, and we bolted. Adrenaline drove us as we crashed through the undergrowth. The chanting didn't fade right away. In fact, for a moment it seemed to chase us, echoing in all directions. We burst out onto the slope behind the homestead, nearly stumbling over each other. Grandpa was there, a rifle propped against his hip. He took one look at our faces and told us to get inside. Over the next hour, we told him about the footprints, the circle of stones, the scrap of tartan, and the silhouettes with bagpipes in hand. He listened, and at the end, he nodded like it confirmed a rumor he'd once heard. That generations ago, certain families who settled these hills mixed cultures, Scottish and Native American, keeping old traditions alive in the most secluded spots. There was no telling if they meant harm. Grandpa planned to notify a ranger station, see if they'd heard of any suspicious gatherings. But I think we all sensed the same foreboding truth. Whatever goes on in these woods after dark might not welcome outsiders. We'd seen enough to know we didn't belong out there at night. When dusk rolled around, we stayed close to the house, porch lights blazing. Kelsey kept her eyes on the ridge, looking for any flicker of firelight or movement among the trees. Ray sat with me in the living room, occasionally glancing at the window. Every so often, I half expected those drums to sound again. Even if they stayed silent, I knew they were only a heartbeat away, tucked in the deep pockets of the Appalachians. We had a name for the fear now, but it didn't make it any less real, and it didn't keep me from wondering if, next time, we might not get away so easily. I've always said these Appalachian mountains were in my bloodstream, a legacy from my grandfather in Boone County, West Virginia. Every time I roll down the highway and see those steep ridges rising in the distance, something inside me sparks to life, like part of me recognizes home. This time, though, that welcome feeling came bundled with an unsettling undercurrent I couldn't quite explain. The plan was simple enough: drive from Michigan to New York City, pick up my friend who needed extra help traveling, and head back to Detroit. I'd done cross-country treks before, so I didn't expect anything beyond the usual long-haul hassle. The first few hours were honestly too quiet. I got pulled over in Ohio for a busted headlight, and even though the trooper was polite, my nerves still buzzed the rest of the night. The idea of sleeping in my car at a rest stop sounded okay at first, but every shuffle of footsteps outside made me sit up and peer into the dark. Eventually I dozed off, but it was a half-baked sort of sleep that left me feeling ragged. By mid-morning, I was back on the road, cutting through Pennsylvania and drinking in the misty peaks off in the distance. Something about those valleys always puts me on edge and at ease all at once, like I belong there, but I also know the land can turn dangerous without warning. The hours ticked by, traffic thickened, and soon I was in the sprawling chaos of New York City. After a painful search for parking, I finally spotted my friend. She hopped into my cramped PT Cruiser, and I was eager to leave the city behind. There's a hyper-awareness that creeps in when I'm stuck in that much congestion. Too many headlights, too many people, and not enough personal space. We were both relieved to point the car west again. Darkness wasn't far off by the time we made decent progress. We'd agreed to pull into a large store parking lot somewhere in western Pennsylvania for the night, somewhere bright enough and busy enough that we wouldn't feel vulnerable. That's where things started getting weird. I rolled into a Walmart lot that was mostly empty except for a handful of cars clustered near the entrance. But parked a little too far out were two vehicles that gave me a sour feeling. Dark-tinted windows, engines idling like they were waiting on something. I tried to wave off my own paranoia, but every time I glanced over, one of the cars seemed to shift closer. My friend noticed it too. She nudged my arm and whispered, "Is it just me, or are they edging toward us?" Her voice was shaky, and it confirmed I wasn't imagining things. I felt tension coil in my gut. We decided to bail. No point in testing our luck. Neither of us wanted to be cornered by strangers in the middle of the night. Pulling out of that lot, I could feel my hands clenching the steering wheel. Driving away eased the pressure only slightly. The next rest stop we aimed for was tucked between shadowy ridges, nearly deserted. My headlights swept over scattered parking spots, and there in the corner was a white Jeep. Newish model, tinted windows, not a soul in sight around it. In the back of my head, I was screaming at myself that I was just being jittery, but I couldn't shake the thought. What if it followed us from the lot? It seemed too coincidental. My friend leaned forward, trying to see if anyone was inside, and that quiet question hung in the air. Could it be the same one? We didn't linger long enough to find out. I swung the car around and got back on the highway, half expecting the Jeep's headlights to pop up in my mirror. For a while, it was just darkness and winding roads, the trees crowding in on either side. My friend and I didn't talk much. We were both in our own heads. Every distant glimmer of lights behind us made my muscles tighten. A few times I caught myself speeding, pushing my old PT Cruiser harder than I should have, just wanting to be around other people, bright lights, safety. Maybe it was overblown fear, or maybe not. Eventually we spotted another big box store off the highway, a place that was open all night. We drifted into the lot, found a spot neither too hidden nor too exposed, and tried to settle in. My friend reclined her seat, fiddling with her phone, and I leaned against the door, letting my eyes close. The adrenaline buzz was fading, replaced by sheer exhaustion. The plan was simple: get some rest, wake up, and push on at dawn. That's all we needed, right? But a nagging alarm kept sounding in the back of my mind. I couldn't help imagining a set of headlights rolling in beside us again. I'd always prided myself on having good instincts, especially on the road, and something was shouting at me to stay alert. Maybe the night was messing with my head, maybe it was the mountain air, but I couldn't settle. I just kept checking the rearview mirror and scanning the corners of the lot, half conscious, waiting for a sign that everything was about to unravel. Looking back, I should have known I wasn't going to get a peaceful rest. The real trouble was just around the corner, and a part of me sensed it even then. The mountains have a way of holding secrets close, and that night, it felt like I was driving straight into one. I'd been through my fair share of late-night drives, but none that left me quite this tense. We'd found another big parking lot, a large store glowing in the distance like some lifeline, and I figured we could finally try to rest. My friend was nodding off in the passenger seat, leaning her head against the window. My eyes felt heavy, but every time I let them close, I'd jolt awake at the faintest hint of movement in my mirrors. At first, the lot seemed almost peaceful, only a smattering of cars, plenty of overhead lights, and the steady hum of night shift employees hauling carts around. I tried to tell myself we'd been imagining things earlier, that those suspicious vehicles were just random folks passing through. Then I spotted headlights drifting in from the far side of the lot, and my grip on the steering wheel tightened again. A white Jeep Compass glided across the asphalt and parked right next to us. There were at least a dozen other open spaces, so why pick the one so close? I glanced to my left, and there he was, the same driver who'd been lingering in my memory, like a fleeting shadow I couldn't quite get rid of. He was young but worn somehow, his gaze heavy and unflinching. A cold energy rolled off him, making my nerves flare. Part of me wanted to brush it off, assume I was just stuck in my own fears. But the longer we locked eyes, the more certain I became that this wasn't random. My friend must have sensed it too. She snapped awake, following my stare. I heard her mutter something like, "Not again." And that was all the push I needed. I cranked the ignition, yanked the gear shift into drive, and tore out of there. The wheels squealed, echoing across the mostly empty lot. I almost expected the Jeep to remain behind, some bizarre coincidence put to rest. Instead, the headlights came to life and stuck to our bumper. I felt a jolt of adrenaline rush through my limbs as I realized we were being followed yet again. The highway ramp was up ahead, and I gunned it, hoping I could leave him behind in the open stretches of road. But once I merged, Those lights were still there, unwavering. Mile after mile, I tried to ignore the tightness in my chest, the nagging thought that I'd let this go too far. Yet I couldn't slow down, not with that Jeep trailing me like it was locked on. Ahead, the mountains rose against the sky, dark silhouettes capped by faint moonlight. We thundered onto an exit, hoping to lose him in the twists and turns of back roads. My friend pulled out her phone, trying to chart a route that might confuse any pursuer. We zigzagged through narrow highways, winding through steep valleys and lonely clusters of trees, the path weaving in a dizzying snake-like pattern. Each time I dared glance back, those headlights burned in the darkness, unshaken by the hairpin curves. Exhaustion gnawed at me, and I wondered how long we could keep this up without making a critical mistake. The roads were almost deserted, lined with battered guardrails and the endless silhouettes of sloping ridges. Everything in me wanted to stop, to catch a moment's calm, but my instincts hollered that would be a terrible idea with this creep hanging on our tail. Then, in a flash of brilliance or desperation, I'm still not sure which, I yanked the wheel onto a hidden side route. The Jeep sped past our turn, its taillights flaring red as it tried to brake too late. A wave of relief washed over me when I realized we might have slipped his grasp. I continued down this narrow road until we reached an aging wooden sign pointing to a smaller town. Streetlights became more frequent. The black outline of the mountains gave way to a dimly lit main street, and for the first time in hours, I let myself breathe. A fast food place, maybe the only one open that early, glowed at the edge of the road. We pulled in, found a spot between work trucks and local cars. The safety of other humans moving around was enough to let the tension in my muscles ease a bit. My friend and I were so drained, we just collapsed against the seats, windows still rolled up tight. After so many panicked miles, the distant hum of a drive-through speaker and the smell of stale French fries felt like a blessing. When the sun finally started creeping over the ragged skyline of mountains, I stirred. My neck ached from sleeping at a weird angle. Outside, life was picking up, people stepping in and out, an elderly couple walking their dog along the sidewalk. No white Jeep in sight. You'd think I would have been relieved, but an odd sense of dread tugged at me. Had we really lost him, or was he just biding his time? I checked my phone, half expecting messages from family asking where I was, but it stayed eerily silent. The air felt thick with unresolved tension. My friend and I ordered some breakfast, greasy but hot, just to ground ourselves in something normal. Every so often we glanced out the windows, scanning each vehicle that pulled through. Nothing suspicious, yet neither of us could fully shake the lingering paranoia. It felt like we'd gone through some twisted rite of passage in those mountains. By the time we climbed back into the car, the morning sunlight was streaming in, almost too bright against the tiredness in our faces. A part of me wished we could head straight home without another break, but I knew I had to keep an eye out for that Jeep, as though it might materialize again. The realization was chilling. A simple trip to help a friend had morphed into this frantic late-night chase. Sure, maybe we were both wound too tight. Maybe the stranger was just some random jerk on a power trip, but I couldn't shake a deeper suspicion that he was dangerous, and that under the vast sky of Appalachia, anything could happen. We buckled up and drove off, leaving that small town in the rear-view mirror. Each mile of highway felt both relieving and nerve-wracking, as if something could pop out any second. By the time we found a route that led back toward Detroit, the mountains were starting to fade behind us. I couldn't help thinking about how, despite my deep respect for those old ridges, I was leaving with a new, grim awareness of the shadows they can hide. I took a final look at the looming outlines in the mirror, imagining that white Jeep hidden somewhere in the valleys, lying in wait. Even if I never found out who was behind the wheel, that night changed me. I used to think of these roads like a second home, a place of comfort and belonging. Now, a knot of tension insisted that some things are better left alone, and that wandering too far into unknown territory can lead to horrors you can't always outrun. I've never posted anything like this before, but I can't get it out of my head. Maybe writing it down will help. I don't care if you believe me. Hell, part of me still doesn't believe it myself. But something followed us in the woods last weekend, and whatever it wasn't human. And it damn sure wasn't an animal either. I'm a senior in college, pre-med. I grew up in western North Carolina, about 40 minutes from the Tennessee border. My parents still live in a small house tucked off a gravel road about 15 minutes from the Appalachian Trail. We're used to isolation, spotty power, no internet unless you're lucky enough to park near the library, no neighbors for miles. It's the kind of place people think is peaceful until the sun goes down. Anyway, between school and work and stress, I hadn't been home in months. When I saw a break in my schedule, I jumped on it. And when my girlfriend Anna said she was free that same weekend, I figured why not take her somewhere real, somewhere without traffic or phone notifications, just quiet. Anna grew up in Atlanta. She's the kind of person who's never had to check for ticks or hang a bear bag. But she's adventurous. I told her I wanted to take her on a backpacking trip, just a short 2-nighter on an old loop that connects to a forgotten spur of the Appalachian Trail. Through this place my granddad always warned me to avoid, called Walker's Hollow. She thought the name was creepy in a fun way. I figured it'd make the trip more memorable. We parked at a barely marked pull-off late Friday afternoon. There was one other car there, older model with dust all over the windows, no people in sight. I double-checked the topo map, shouldered my pack, and we headed in. The trail was overgrown in parts, like it hadn't been maintained in years. Oak and poplar trees pressed in tight from either side, and thick patches of rhododendron arched over the path like tunnels. The further we walked, the quieter it got. Not in the peaceful way either. More like the woods were listening. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to freak Anna out. We passed a couple weird markers nailed to trees. Planks of faded wood with what looked like white paint, or maybe old chalk markings. Most were too worn down to read. One had what looked like a symbol carved into it, a triangle with a circle in the middle. Someone had scratched it out with a knife. I told myself it was just an old forestry mark, nothing unusual. After about 5 miles, we reached a decent campsite near a little creek. There was a fire ring someone had built years ago, half collapsed and full of soggy leaves. I cleaned it out while Anna unpacked, and we managed to get a small fire going before dark. Dinner was basic: dehydrated chili mac and 2 lukewarm granola bars. But the air was clean, and the forest smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke. For a little while, it felt good to be out there again. Anna said the woods were way quieter than she expected. She asked if there were coyotes out here, and I laughed. Then I showed her my old party trick. When I was younger, I used to mimic coyote howls to see if I could get them to respond. Not exactly useful, but I was good at it. So I stood up, cupped my hands, and let out a long, shrill howl across the creek bed. She rolled her eyes. That was loud as hell. I grinned. Wait for it. We stood in silence, listening. Nothing. Just the hiss of the creek and a breeze shaking the branches overhead. I tried again, this time throwing in some yips at the end for good measure. Still nothing. Maybe they're all curled up in a den somewhere, I said, shrugging. And then it came. A sound echoed back to us, but it wasn't a coyote. It started low, like a whistle caught in the wind, and then climbed into this piercing, unnatural screech that seemed to stretch too long, like it didn't need to breathe. It came from up the ridge behind us. Not far. Anna stiffened. What the hell was that? I froze. Bobcat maybe, I said. But I knew that wasn't right. I've heard bobcats. This sounded higher, like metal tearing, like a scream that didn't know how to stop. Anna backed closer to the fire. That was not a bobcat. I didn't answer. I just scanned the trees. That part of the ridge is dense with undergrowth, especially in fall. The fog had started to roll in heavy, thickening between the trunks like smoke. My skin prickled, and I could feel the warmth of the fire only in theory. We didn't stay up much longer. We doused the fire, zipped into the tent, and lay there listening. I kept my headlamp and my knife by my side. Anna fell asleep eventually. I didn't, because I kept hearing something moving just past the tree line, something that clicked when it walked. something that stopped moving every time I held my breath. And sometime after midnight, I swear to God, I saw two pale eyes watching from just beyond the trees. They didn't glow, they just reflected. I don't know when I fell asleep. Must have been sometime after 3, when the movement outside finally stopped. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe I just passed out from pure exhaustion, adrenaline finally giving up on me. Either way, I woke up with a start just before dawn. That hazy blue light was barely bleeding through the nylon of our tent, and my mouth felt dry, like I'd been grinding my teeth all night. Anna was still asleep beside me, but she was twitching, her legs jerking under the sleeping bag like she was dreaming of running. And then I heard it again. That clicking. It was faint this time, slower than the night before, like hooves gently tapping against stone or wood. I held my breath. It was circling us. I didn't dare look through the mesh this time. I just lay there, paralyzed, trying to convince myself it was a deer, maybe a curious buck, maybe something explainable. Then I heard a voice. It sounded like Anna, but it was coming from outside the tent. It was soft, almost whispering. "Hey, come out here." Her exact cadence, her exact tone, but Anna was still asleep next to me. I watched her breathing, her lips slack and pale in the cold. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I just waited. The voice repeated, same words, same softness. "Come out here." And then everything went quiet again. No birds, no wind, not even the creek. I don't know how long I lay there, but when Anna finally woke up, she said she had the worst dream of her life. That she saw me standing over her in the woods, asking her to follow me into the trees. Only I wasn't wearing a shirt, and my chest was covered in blood. We broke camp in silence. No jokes, no breakfast. We didn't even talk about going home. We just knew. This wasn't just a creepy night in the woods. Something was wrong here, wrong in a way I can't fully explain. We started hiking fast, packs bouncing, barely checking the map. But the trail felt off. Places I remembered weren't where they should have been. A footbridge that should have crossed the creek was gone. We found stone piles, cairns, stacked neatly in rows beside the trail, dozens of them. Some small, some tall. Some had bones placed carefully in the center, little ones. And then we saw the tree. It was maybe 50 yards off trail. A big poplar, gnarled and dead. Nailed into the side of it was an old iron horseshoe. Hanging from the horseshoe was a rope, and tied to the rope, no BS, was a deer skull. But the skull had carvings in it. Weird symbols like spirals and claw marks etched into the bone. Anna wanted to turn around right there, but I was too stubborn. I kept thinking if we just kept going, we'd hit the old trail shelter I remembered from years ago. A small A-frame near the ridgeline where we could get our bearings. So we pushed on. The fog got thicker, the trail got thinner. At one point, I swear we passed the same tree 3 different times. One with a split trunk and a slash of orange lichen across the side. That's when I started to think maybe we weren't just lost. Maybe something was leading us, or worse, circling us. When we finally stumbled into the clearing, I almost cried from relief. The old trail shelter was still standing, barely. Roof half caved, moss all over the north wall, and some raccoon poop in the corner. But it was shelter. It was a place. We huddled up inside, ate some protein bars with shaking hands, and tried to get warm. I told Anna to rest while I checked the area. Didn't want to admit I was looking for signs of whatever that thing was. Tracks, fur, anything. But there was nothing. Just the quiet again. I climbed back into the shelter and must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember is Anna screaming. She was standing outside the shelter, staring at the ground. "No, no, no! What is that? What is that?" At her feet was a perfect circle of stones. We hadn't made it. It hadn't been there when we arrived. Inside the circle was her boot, one of the ones she was wearing the night before. It was dry, clean, the laces perfectly tied. She checked her feet. Both boots were on. I've never seen her that pale in my life. She couldn't stop crying. She kept asking me, how did it get that? How did it know? I had no answers. I just knew we couldn't stay. We packed and left that shelter without looking back. But even then, I had the feeling we were still being watched. Not hunted exactly, more like studied, like something out there was learning us. By the time we left that shelter, I'd given up on the map. Nothing made sense anymore. The landscape felt like it had folded in on itself. Trees were repeating. I'd walk 30 feet and swear we were back where we started. Even Anna noticed it. She stopped asking if we were going the right way. We both knew we weren't. I don't think there was a right way anymore. The fog was thicker than ever, rolling low across the forest floor, coiling around the trees like it was alive. The light never changed. Morning never really became day. There was just this dull gray half-light filtering through bare branches that looked wrong, like we were trapped inside a dream where the sun never quite rose. We didn't speak much, just walked. Fast, packs bouncing. Every few steps I'd check over my shoulder, and eventually I saw them. Figures, not close, not even fully visible. Just dark shapes slipping between trees up on the ridge, always just out of sight. Too thin to be human, moving too fast, but always upright, always two-legged. The air started to smell like wet fur and decay, like something had died days ago and never cooled. At one point, Anna gagged and dropped to her knees. Her nose started bleeding. I pulled her up and we kept moving, somewhere around late afternoon, if that even means anything in that place. We reached a small rocky clearing. It looked like a dried-up creek bed, maybe 20 feet wide. There was a tree in the center, completely stripped of bark. Around it were piles of bones, big bones. Some looked like deer, but others looked human. Long, pale femurs, rib cages, jaws, but not fresh. These had been picked clean, arranged even, laid in spirals, patterns. Some were buried upright in the dirt like markers. Anna whispered, "This isn't random." And she was right. Something had put them here. Something had made this. That's when we heard it again, the clicking. Not from one direction, from all around us. Then the shriek. Only this time it was louder, closer, and it didn't echo. It just hit us, like a pressure wave that made our ears ring and our stomachs flip. Anna clutched my arm and screamed, and I grabbed her and ran. We didn't look back, we just bolted. Branches clawed at our faces. Mud sucked at our shoes. Somewhere behind us, I heard another shriek, then another, and another, higher and higher, all overlapping. They were calling to each other. We tore through the woods until the fog broke and the trees thinned. And suddenly, we were standing on a rocky overlook. Below us, winding like a ribbon through the valley, was the trail, the real trail. Switchbacks and all, and far down near the base of the ridge, was the goddamn parking lot. We didn't even stop to breathe. We just scrambled down, sliding, grabbing branches, half falling the whole way. At the last switchback, I looked back, and there it was, standing alone at the edge of the tree line. Tall, gaunt, its limbs too long for its frame, legs bent backward, hooves sunk into the dirt. Its torso heaved slowly like it was panting. The skin was so thin I could see its ribs rising and falling, and its face, still twisted into that horrific, almost human snarl, looked straight at me. The eyes were clouded, like cataracts, but I felt them lock with mine. Then it opened its mouth, and in my voice it said, "Don't leave me." Anna heard it too. I felt her grip my hand tighter. Then more of them stepped out from the trees. 5, 6, maybe more. All identical, yet slightly off. Wrong in different ways. One with a crooked neck, one with broken antlers, one missing a jaw entirely, all of them watching. We ran. We reached the car, shaking and filthy, and I barely got the keys in the ignition. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. They were still standing there, just watching. We didn't stop driving until we hit Asheville. I didn't sleep for 2 days. Anna hasn't spoken about it since. She dropped the class we shared and hasn't returned my texts. I tried reporting it. The ranger I spoke to looked at me like I was insane. Said that section of trail had been closed years ago after a wildfire. No maintained shelters up there. No known campsites. I asked him if he'd heard of Walker's Hollow. He paused. Said that name hadn't been used in decades. Then he told me, quietly, that the last time someone reported going up there, It was a rescue mission. A couple of hikers had gone missing. Their gear was found. Their boots were found. But not them. No bodies, just bones, arranged in spirals. I'm not saying you have to believe me, but if you're ever on the Appalachian Trail, and you see a tree marked with a triangle and a circle inside, turn around. Don't answer the call. And if you hear your own voice echoing from the woods, it's already too late. This happened in the fall of 2021, somewhere between Max Patch and Hot Springs on the Appalachian Trail. I haven't told many people about it, partly because I still don't understand it myself, and partly because I know how insane it sounds. There were 5 of us: me, Liam, Caroline, Josh, and Ray. We were all experienced hikers, not just weekend warriors. We'd planned a 10-day section hike, aimed for early October to avoid the crowds and the worst of the bugs. No one brought GPS. We were trying to keep it old school: paper maps, compasses, and instinct. We were about 3 days in when this happened. We camped on a flat shelf just off the trail. It had rained the night before, so we expected a bit of morning mist. What we woke up to was something else entirely. The fog was thick, but it wasn't moving. It didn't roll or lift with the sun. It just sat there, still and dense, like it was pinned in place. I couldn't see more than 15, maybe 20 feet in any direction. No birds, no bugs, no wind. Just the damp and the silence. Even when I called out to Liam, who was only 10 feet away, my voice sounded muffled, like we were talking through insulation. He was poking at the fire pit, trying to get a flame going. Caroline stood near the edge of camp, watching the trees like they might start moving. We all tried to play it cool. Mist happens, right? We packed up slow, hoping it would clear. That's when we heard it. Laughter. High-pitched. Definitely kids. At first just one giggle, then a few more, like a group playing tag just out of sight. We froze. I mean, we were deep in the woods, miles from any road or shelter. There shouldn't have been anyone else, let alone children. Ray said maybe it was a scout group. Josh shrugged. Weird, but not impossible, he said, but even he sounded uncertain. Then the kids appeared, 8 of them, pale, silent, walking in a line, with one tall figure behind them that I assumed was an adult. They didn't say anything at first, just moved past us, right through our camp, like they didn't see us or didn't care. Their clothes were old-fashioned, muted grays and browns, buttoned up all the way to the neck. No bags, no water, no gear. They didn't look dirty, just off. One of the girls stopped and turned to us. Her head tilted a little too far, like she wasn't used to how necks were supposed to work. "Where are you going?" she asked. Liam, always the smartass, said, "Heading north, through hiking the AT." The girl blinked. Her lips twitched like she was trying to smile but didn't remember how. "This isn't the Appalachian Trail," she said. Then she turned and kept walking. The rest followed. The tall figure, hooded, face hidden, brought up the rear. And then they were gone, back into the fog. We just stood there. No one said anything for a long time. Eventually, Ray muttered, "Okay, that was messed up." Caroline wanted to pack up and go back south. Liam said we should keep going. I didn't know what to think. Part of me figured it had to be some kind of elaborate prank, or we'd stumbled into a film crew or a live-action thing. But deep down, something didn't feel right. We voted, 3-2 to push ahead. So we did. We hadn't gone a mile before we started seeing strange stuff. First, it was the trees. Some of them had markings, white stick figures scratched into the bark. Not like trailblazes. These were crude. One tree had a spiral. Another had a row of slashes. 8 vertical lines, one long one crossing them all out. Then we found the dates. One tree had a series of carvings spaced about a foot apart. 1941, 1951, 1961. It kept going. The last one was 2021, our year. I don't scare easy, but that made my stomach drop. No one talked much after that. We kept moving, but the air felt heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. It never got brighter. The fog stayed with us the whole day, and the worst part, every so often, faint and distant but unmistakable, we kept hearing that laughter, just behind the trees, never ahead of us, always behind. By late afternoon, none of us were talking. The fog hadn't let up at all. We kept waiting for it to burn off like normal, but it just hung there, thick, still, and cold. The kind of cold that settles into your clothes and never leaves. We hadn't seen another blaze in hours. No mileage markers, no trail junctions, nothing. It felt like we were walking in circles, even though we stuck to a straight line as best we could. We tried checking our compasses, but they were all giving slightly different bearings. Josh said it was probably a mineral deposit, but even he didn't sound confident. Around dusk, we heard the kids again. Laughter. Same pitch, same cadence. Too close. It was different this time, closer and sharper. It would pop up to the left of us, then to the right, then straight ahead, like they were circling us, following us, not playing anymore. Josh stopped and pointed at a tree ahead. Carved into the bark was a spiral, not a normal one. It was jagged and uneven, almost like it was scratched in with something sharp. Inside the spiral were 8 small stick figures. Liam leaned in close, then backed away fast. "They're all missing eyes," he muttered. We were losing it. Caroline wanted to set up camp before dark. Ray agreed, said hiking blind in fog was a bad idea. We found a spot near a rock wall, not ideal, but at least we had our backs covered. We set up quickly and agreed to keep watch in pairs. That night, I barely slept. I was on second watch with Ray. Around 1 in the morning, we realized we hadn't heard Josh in a while. His tent was zipped but empty. No gear, no pack, no sign of him walking off. He didn't snore like usual, wasn't even rustling around. We started calling for him, first quietly, then louder. No response. Caroline joined us, barefoot, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. We didn't go far, just 20 yards from camp, when we saw him. He was standing perfectly still in the middle of a small clearing, surrounded by 8 tiny piles of rocks. Each pile was stacked exactly the same, 3 stones on the bottom, 1 small flat stone on top. The same 8 pattern from before. Josh wasn't moving. Eyes open, but blank, pale. He looked right through us. When I called his name, he finally spoke. "They showed me the real path." That's all he said. Then our flashlights all cut out at once. No flicker, no warning, just dead. Everything went pitch black, and the fog got thicker. I swear to God I heard something exhale. Not a person, not an animal. It was low and long and sounded wrong, like it didn't come from lungs. Branches snapped all around us. Ray grabbed Josh and we dragged him back to camp, stumbling the whole way. Liam was standing by the fire pit, holding a flare he hadn't lit yet. We got the tents zipped, huddled up, knives out. No one slept. When the light started coming back the next morning, I unzipped the tent. We were right back in that same clearing. Same piles of rocks. But now one of them had a small rotted child's shoe placed neatly on top. That's when Caroline lost it. She sat down, shaking, muttering that we needed to get off this trail immediately. Liam said we should retrace our steps, but that was impossible. We had no idea where we were. Josh didn't say a word. He just stared at the shoe. We tried to move fast that morning. No breakfast. Just slammed energy bars and started hiking downhill. We figured if we kept going down, we'd hit a road or a stream, something. We didn't say it out loud, but we all knew the truth. We weren't on the Appalachian Trail anymore, and whatever trail we were on, someone had put us there. We didn't talk much that morning, not because we were tired, none of us had slept, but because we were scared. Josh still hadn't said another word. He just followed us, eyes down, like he was being led. We moved fast, choosing the steepest downhill we could find, hoping it would lead us to water, a forest road, anything. We tore through brush, tripped over roots, didn't care. Compass needles kept twitching. Phones were still dead. Fog pressed in tighter the lower we went. And that feeling, like we were being watched, it hadn't left. About an hour in, Ray spotted something ahead, a structure. We thought maybe it was a trail shelter or a ranger outpost. Turned out it was an old half-rotted lean-to with a collapsed roof and moss covering half the frame. We stepped inside anyway, just to breathe. Inside were drawings, dozens of them, nailed to the wooden walls, crayon, charcoal, blood-colored paint. All of them were the same, stick figures walking in a line into a spiral. In one drawing, 5 stick figures were colored red, the rest were black. There was also a Polaroid tacked to the back wall. It was us. Standing at Springer Mountain 2 weeks earlier. Same clothes, same gear, same smiles. None of us remembered anyone taking that photo. The moment I saw it, the nausea hit me. Not the kind you can walk off, the kind that comes from deep, like your body knows something before your mind does. Then we heard the dragging sound, metal scraping over stone, slow, heavy, right outside. Liam whispered for everyone to shut up. We backed into the far corner behind a stack of old crates. Through the cracks in the wall, we saw them, the children. Same 8 kids, same dead expressions, same clothes. They weren't walking this time. They were standing still, in a semicircle, humming something tuneless. Their mouths didn't move. Behind them was the tall figure, the adult, still hooded, still silent. He stepped forward and unrolled a massive piece of paper. A map, our map. Same trail route, same campsites. But now there were new marks, symbols we didn't recognize, loops and slashes and spirals. The trail didn't lead to hot springs anymore. It led right back to that clearing with the stone piles. At the center of the spiral, written in black ink, was one word: return. Josh stepped forward like he was about to walk out and join them. Caroline grabbed him. Ray flicked a lighter. That tiny flame felt like our last defense. We ran, didn't look back, just booked it through the trees, slicing through thorn bush and undergrowth. I don't know how long we ran, maybe an hour, maybe 3. At some point the fog started thinning. The air felt lighter. Sound returned. Birds, leaves rustling, distant water. Then the trees opened up and we hit gravel. A fire road. 5 minutes later, a green U.S. Forest Service truck pulled around the bend. The ranger inside gave us a weird look when he saw our condition. Torn clothes, dried blood, no packs. But didn't ask many questions. Just radioed for backup and drove us to the station near Hot Springs. We told them we got turned around and lost our gear. That's all we said. No one mentioned the kids. No one mentioned the map. A few days later, I went back online and looked up missing persons reports. Found 8 cases from the last 40 years, all from that same stretch of trail. All unsolved. Ages ranged from 6 to 12. A few were listed as runaways, most weren't. I also checked the lean-to, not on any map. Rangers said no such structure existed there. Josh still won't talk about it. He barely talks at all now. The rest of us don't hike together anymore. But sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think about that girl's voice, the way she said it. Calm, sure. This isn't the Appalachian Trail. I believe her now. And if you ever find yourself lost in the fog on that section of trail, and you hear laughter, don't look for where it's coming from. Just keep moving. And whatever you do, don't answer them back. The trail register at Massey Gap felt colder than the air. The metal box beaded with a dawn frost so fine it looked like powdered glass. I signed my name, Evan Mallory, Asheville, North Carolina, then scribbled a note for my fiancé. 7 days of quiet, 10 miles a day, back with a clearer head and better stories. I shut the lid. The clang echoed through the high meadows where wild ponies pawed at frosted grass, their breath foggy plumes in the dim blue light. If there was a more peaceful place to put a restless mind right, I hadn't found it. For the first 2 miles the world felt brand new. Hooves clipped stone behind me, and a chestnut pony trotted close enough that I could stroke its shaggy mane. Beyond the bald summit of Wilburn Ridge, spruce needles glittered under a rising sun, and somewhere to the east a pileated woodpecker hammered out a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I breathed deep, tasting wood smoke on the wind. Odd because campfires were banned until winter rains returned. I told myself a hunter down in the lowlands was burning crop stubble and pushed on. By late afternoon, I reached a sheltered saddle below Buzzard Rock and pitched my tent on ground padded with needles. While the jet boil hissed, I filmed a quick GoPro diary. Day 1. Easy miles. Strange hint of smoke all day. Probably nothing. Missing you already, Jules. The stove clicked off. Silence reclaimed the forest, save for an occasional pop hiss, like damp logs flashing to steam inside a distant blaze. I lay there afterward, headlamp off, letting darkness settle. But as night thickened, that fire crackle seemed closer, drifting between ridge pines and slow pulses, as though someone were coaxing reluctant coals back to life. Cold pulled me from sleep just after midnight. My breath floated white in the tent. Then a soft scrape, fabric brushing against something rough, and my vestibule wall flexed inward, pressed by an unseen hand. I froze. Another pop hiss sounded inches from my ear, the unmistakable snap of sap boiling. I fumbled for the zipper, yanked it open, and shone my headlamp into the trees. Nothing, except a faint orange glow hovering 20 yards away. A single ember brightening, dimming, brightening again like a firefly trapped in a bell jar. I tried to fix my eyes on it, but the light winked out the moment I focused. Wind eased through spruce crowns, yet the air smelled sharper, the smoke thicker. With no courage to investigate, I zipped the door and lay stiff until dawn washed the ridge in gray. Morning revealed something I couldn't explain. The rainfly, once moss green, bore a streak of soot the width of a hand that smeared down from the apex to the stake loop. I touched the mark, and the residue blackened my fingertip. Somehow a burning ember had brushed the fabric without melting it. I packed quickly, eager to leave Buzzard Rock. The trail climbed toward Mount Rogers under a sky thin as milk, and every switchback delivered the same scent. Wood smoke, but layered now with the sour note of singed hair. At Wilburn Ridge I paused to drink and spotted hoofprints, yet several were scorched black, edges crisp as cookie cutters burned into the turf. Steam curled from one as though it had cooled only moments earlier. A pony herd grazed 100 yards off. None limped or seemed hurt. Still, unease crawled up my spine like cold drizzle under a collar. Late light slanted gold between rhododendron thickets when I found a level spot beneath 2 hemlocks. Their trunks leaned together like conspirators, shielding me from bitter wind. I gathered dead twigs, careful not to break the fire ban, and settled into my sleeping bag. Twilight painted the tent walls amber, then violet. Sometime in the black hours, a shape loomed against the fly, kneeling, shoulders hunched. Lightning, silent and distant, flashed on the horizon, illuminating a silhouette whose head was cocked as though listening to my heartbeat. I slapped the knife clipped to my ridgeline, unzipped the door, and jabbed my light forward. The figure was gone, but on the ground lay a neat pile of cedar shavings. They formed an arrow, its barbed point aimed south, deeper into the wilderness. The shavings smoldered at their tips, tiny curls collapsing into gray dust without flame. I scooped a handful, still warm, and scattered them in the wind. Sleep deserted me. With each hour the air grew warmer, my breath no longer visible. Condensation beaded on the map inside my journal, and when I turned the page to tomorrow's date, the ink bubbled and ran, the paper itself curling as if held above a candle. I wanted to believe dawn would make sense of it, that daylight would blow away childish dread. Instead, sunrise lit the forest in bruised purple, and every step south felt like descending into a kiln. My pulse drummed in my ears. Sweat traced icy rivulets down my ribs, though the thermometer read 42. Around me, sap bled from spruce knots and sizzled on the bark. I quickened my pace, repeating a quiet litany. 7 days, 10 miles, clear head. But behind that mantra, another thought clawed for attention. Something out here is burning, and it wants me to follow the smoke. The fallen hemlock looked as if a colossal hand had twisted it from the soil and slammed it across the white-blazed corridor. Its shattered crown blocked the trail so completely I could not even snake under the branches. I studied my map and spotted a faint dotted line. Devil's Ladder. An unofficial connector said to shave a mile off the ridge if you were willing to endure knee-busting grades. At that moment, the main trail felt like a chimney spewing smoke straight at me, so I chose the detour and plunged into the understory. Almost at once, the forest temperature leapt. My breath no longer steamed. Instead, a damp heat pressed against my skin, warm enough that sweat pooled under my pack straps, even though the thermometer on my watch still insisted it was 45 degrees. Sap blistered from spruce trunks and dripped to the duff with a hiss, as though the trees themselves were cooking from within. I checked my phone to mark the side trail, but the bars dropped to 0 before the screen faded to black. Battery dead. I told myself I could navigate by compass just fine, yet something about the phone's abrupt silence felt like a door closing behind me. Devil's Ladder earned its name with every step. The path pitched downward so steeply I half-skied on loose needles. Around me the air grew thicker, shimmering in waves that made the nearest boulders wobble like mirages. Then I smelled it again. Burning hair mixed with scorched cedar, and my pulse pounded high in my throat. I rounded a switchback and halted. 5 paces ahead, half concealed by rhododendron leaves, stood the man from last night. He faced away, shoulders hunched, blackened skin cracked in flakes that revealed depths of glowing red as if he were forged iron left too long in the coals. His clothes had melted to his flesh. Tatters fluttered in wind that I could not feel. Smoke curled from his scalp in thin blue threads. He turned, and those ember eyes fixed on mine without blinking. I wanted to scream, but the air in my lungs tasted of ash. The figure stepped forward. Every branch he brushed ignited in a brief tongue of flame that vanished the instant he passed, leaving needles intact yet smoldering at the tips. Their green turned ghost white. He extended a hand. Sparks pinwheeled off his fingertips and died before touching the ground, as if the fire existed only for him. Reflex broke the trance. I stumbled backward, boots skidding on gravel, and the sudden movement seemed to startle the thing. Its head tilted, cracking skin along its neck that glowed brighter, hotter. Without warning, the image fragmented. My vision wavered in ripples of heat distortion, and the GoPro strapped to my pack beeped in error tone, its display filling with static bands even though it was powered off. My nostrils flooded with the chemical tang of melting circuitry. I turned and ran. The grade was so steep I barely controlled each stride, careening off trunks, branches whipping my arms. Behind me came slow, deliberate footsteps, charcoal crunching under burned feet. No matter how wildly I zigzagged, the cadence never quickened, but it never paused either. It sounded patient, inevitable, like the tick of a metronome marking the moment the forest would ignite. By the time dusk bled through the canopy, I had lost the tread of Devil's Ladder and found myself in a narrow hollow choked with hemlock skeletons. Dead man's draw, if the locals' warnings were right. Even here the ground sweated heat. I slashed at vines to clear a flat patch no bigger than a coffin and threw up my tent, hands trembling so badly the poles clicked like chattering teeth. Night sealed the hollow, and at once the forest began to breathe. A low, rasping inhale, then a bellows soft exhale, again and again, each breath exuding a faint red glow that rolled over the hillsides like banked coals stirred by wind. Inside the tent, darkness pressed against the nylon. My watch read 92 degrees, though outside it had to be near freezing. Sweat soaked my base layers. Then the footsteps returned, shuffling in a widening spiral, circling. I heard skin crackle with every step, like ice shifting on a thawing lake. The thing whispered my name, drawn out, syllables stretched thin, as if exhaling through shredded vocal cords. Even. Each time it spoke, the temperature spiked, and my water bladder ballooned with expanding air until seams creaked. Hours dragged past. I held my multi-tool like a charm that could fend off fire. Just before dawn, the footsteps stopped. Silence settled so suddenly my ears rang. Then something pressed against the tent wall directly over my heart. A hard, irregular shape, smaller than a fist yet impossibly hot. Nylon sizzled. I jerked away, stuffing my sleeping bag into the corner. The object slid down the outside and thumped to the ground with a sound like wet ash falling. Through the thin fabric, a faint red glow pulsed. I forced myself to unzip the door. Outside lay a child's sneaker, or what remained of one, canvas mostly burned away, rubber warped and cracked. The toe melted into a bleak grin. Inside the blackened sole, numbers blistered through the char. 1986. As I stared, a single ember flared in the hollow toe, then winked out, leaving the shoe cold and silent. The sun crested the ridge, but Deadman's Draw stayed dim, as if light itself feared to linger. I packed in minutes, every motion punctuated by the thought hammering in my skull. The fire was following me, and it had just shown me the year it first learned my name. I ran until my lungs tasted like copper, and the heat behind me faded to the faint rustle of cooling ash. At a bend in the hollow, the trees gave way to a rutted service road, slick with last night's rain. Dawn had not truly broken, only a dim pewter glow seeped through the clouds, but steam already curled from the gravel in lazy spirals. The farther I hiked, the more the air smelled of wet cinders and something sweeter, like pine pitch boiling on a stove. An hour later I saw it, a farmhouse crouched at the road's end. Nothing left but black ribs of framing and a stubborn stone chimney that leaked gray vapor. The porch roof had collapsed. Charred rafters lay like snapped wings across the stoop. Heat still bled from the wreckage, shimmering in waves that bent the world behind it out of shape. I wanted to skirt the place entirely, but my legs buckled at the sight of a black and white cruiser nosed into the weeds. County emblem flaking from the door, emergency lights cold. I staggered closer. With a hiss, the driver's window rolled down, and a woman in a tan uniform leaned out, exhaustion etched in the creases around her eyes. "You all right, sir?" Her badge read Riddle. The name fit the morning. Words tangled in my throat, but I managed. "Something's after me. It's on fire, and it walks." Sheriff Ada Riddle studied me for a heartbeat too long, then popped the passenger door. "Get in. We'll talk where there's water between us and the ruins." The vinyl seat scorched my palms with residual heat, too hot for fabric untouched by flame. We rolled forward 30 yards and stopped beside a rusted stock trough half full of rainwater. Steam coiled from the hood where my gloves had landed. "House went up 4 nights ago," she said, watching the ruins in her side mirror. Neighbors smelled burning bacon at 3 a.m. and fire brigade found the family huddled near that back door. Father, mother, teenage boy. No accelerant, no wiring fault, just combustion. Her gaze flicked to the blistered streak across my pack. "You saw someone." "Saw him, heard him. He followed me down Devil's Ladder." I described the ember eyes, the skin like cracked porcelain over embers, the shoe stamped 1986. With each detail, her face drained a shade paler. 86. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. "I was 12 that year. 3 hikers burned to death in a cabin off Green Cove Road. Volunteer rescue found only footprints burned into the floor. Case went cold. Folks blame a vagrant who died in his own chimney fire that winter. Swear his spirit brands anyone intruding on these ridges." She laughed once, brittle. "I never put stock in ghost stories until this week." She flicked the dash cam on, just in case, and handed me a lukewarm canteen. I drank in ragged gulps. The instant metal touched my lips, a hot wind whooshed across the field, curling smoke skyward. From the tree line beyond the house, a shape unfolded, taller than before, every joint glowing deeper, as if stoked to white heat. The temperature inside the cruiser jumped. Plastic on the steering wheel softened. The entity stepped onto the lane. Grass beneath its feet withered to gray stalks that burst into wisps of flame and died. Its gaze locked on me through the windshield. The cruiser's engine ticked, metal expanding. Sheriff Riddle threw the vehicle into reverse, but the tires only hissed on melting tar. She cursed, then bolted out, grabbed a canvas fire blanket from the trunk, and hurled it at the apparition. The fabric unfurled mid-air like a sail, striking the creature's shoulders. For an instant the flames dimmed. The form flickered, edges swimming. I staggered after her, yanked a half barrel off its stand, and tipped a torrent of cold rainwater across the lane. Steam roared upward, enveloping us in scalding fog. Through the cloud I heard the entity howl, wood exploding in a kiln, and felt the wash of heat surge, then ebb, as if something vital had been banked. When the steam cleared, the blanket lay smoldering atop a dark, man-shaped smear on the asphalt. No figure, only a circle of char so black it ate the morning light. The sheriff exhaled a shaky breath. "Let's hope that buys us some time." We drove. 2 miles felt like 20, engine knocking from overheated oil. At Sparrow Gap Ranger Station, she guided the cruiser beneath a corrugated overhang and killed the ignition. Rangers emerged, radios already alive with chatter about flare-ups on the ridge. Grass fires that vanished. Ada ordered them to fetch extinguishers and wet sheets. Inside the cramped office, I scrubbed soot off my hands. Skin sloughed away in tender pink sheets, and beneath it new blisters rose, perfect ovals mirroring the burned fingerprints left on my tent. I wrapped them in gauze, but heat seeped through, a pulse that matched my own heart. Through the window, I saw Ada lean against her cruiser's hood. Where my palms had braced earlier, a black handprint still glowed, faint threads of smoke curling upward like incense. A ranger aimed the hose, but water broke around an invisible shield. Droplets hissed and slid off, unable to touch the scorch mark. The sheriff met my eyes across the lot, and in her expression was the hollow certainty that what we'd faced had not been defeated, only delayed. A gust of wind carried the smell of fresh smoke from somewhere higher on the mountain. The radio crackled. "Control, we've got a new hotspot flaring above Buzzard Rock. Looks like a column." Ada's shoulders sagged. I felt the heat blooming under my bandages, traveling cheek to collarbone, as if mapping the path of fire yet to come. Somewhere out in the timber, a slow, deliberate footstep crunched across charcoal, and I realized the entity was already moving again. Patient, methodical, unhurried, taking the long way down the mountain to find me. 7 days, I had promised Jules, 10 miles a day and back with a clearer head. But some journeys, once lit, burn far longer than planned, and some trails once followed never truly let you leave their smoke behind. I caught the first glint of sunrise off the Wolf Creek trailhead sign and felt my nerves twitch. Someone had hammered a splintered board across the kiosk. "Keep quiet after dark," then half ripped it away, as if they changed their mind mid-warning. I pried it loose and slipped it into my pack, telling Jenna I wanted it as a souvenir. Truth was, I hated leaving omens behind me. The air smelled of wet stones and cold pine sap. Fog lay so thick across the switchbacks that each exhale bounced back against my cheeks. Jenna's trekking poles clicked a steady rhythm beside me, but everything else, wind, birds, distant road noise, had been muffled to nothing. We climbed in silence until the damp reached through my shirt and tightened across my shoulders. Just past the first saddle, the fog thinned enough to show the trail's dirt spine, and that was when I noticed the boot prints, one set, deep and alone in the mud, size 13 at least. They stretched maybe 50 yards, veered to the left, then vanished where the path cut across bare rock. I searched for the next print in the leaf litter beyond, but the earth there looked untouched. No crushed twigs, no skid marks, nothing. My stomach knotted. Whoever made those tracks walked off trail into brush so dense even deer left obvious tunnels. Yet he, or it, left no trace. I told myself a hunter in lightweight boots might manage that, but I kept glancing over my shoulder for the next half mile. By early afternoon, the sun punched holes through the whiteout, and we stopped by an unnamed seep the guidebook promised was year-round. Water trickled out of moss-cloaked limestone, clear as glass. But when Jenna knelt to fill the filter bag, she froze. "Alex, look." A latticework of sharpened twigs lay wedged beneath the surface, each stick shaved to twin points, crisscrossed like an amateur catcher's trap. They stank of sweetness gone rotten, fermented fruit and wet mulch. I lifted one with my knife tip. The bark sloughed off slick as eelskin, exposing pale wood riddled with pinholes the size of sewing needles. I dropped it and tasted copper in my mouth. We camped a little uphill where the ground leveled off, a narrow bench just wide enough for the two-person tent. I forced a laugh while tying the last guy line. "Bear can's 30 yards that way, exits over here, no problem." Jenna nodded and squeezed my hand, but I felt the pulse in her fingers racing faster than mine. Night sealed the forest by 9. Fog drifted back in thicker than before, and moonlight flickered like a dying bulb behind the clouds. I woke with a start to a sound that did not belong. Crunch, pause, crunch. Not leaves rustling. Footfalls, deliberate and measured, circling. My watch read 2:03 in the morning. Jenna's eyes shone in the dim as I unzipped the tent halfway and slid the headlamp strap around my wrist. The beam pierced maybe 20 feet before the vapor swallowed it, but in that cone of light 3 shapes crouched among the laurels, scarecrow thin, limbs wrapped in what looked like burlap ribbon clotted with moss. Their heads turned flatly, no bobbing like people adjusting balance, just a single fluid pivot toward me. Eye sockets reflected nothing, matte and dull, as if someone had sculpted faces from river stones. I stepped forward. Instinct screamed to drive them off. "Hey!" My voice cracked, and the figures flinched. One uncoiled to its full height, at least 7 feet, and raised 2 dead branches in each hand. Click, click. The sticks met, perfectly mimicking Jenna's laugh from dinner, brittle and bright in the stillness. My skin crawled so hard it almost tore. "Leave!" I shouted, taking another step, but the headlamp trembled in my fist and the beam jittered across tree trunks. In that strobe the figures scattered, no stumbling, no snapping brush, only a blur of gray limbs melting upslope, then absolute silence. Even the creak we'd heard all evening had gone mute. I backed inside, zipped the flap, and pressed my shoulder against Jenna's. We sat like that until dawn turned the fog a dingy silver. Outside, the dew-heavy ground around the tent was pocked with prints. Bare, narrow, each foot 6 toes wide, and ending in tiny claw points. They formed a perfect circle, toes aimed inward, as though the 3 had stood equidistant all night simply watching the nylon walls breathe. Jenna whispered, "We're leaving now." I nodded, unable to answer. As I shouldered my pack, the souvenir board shifted against my spine. I almost hurled it into the woods, but I couldn't bring myself to let it go. We hiked out without breakfast. The forest gave nothing but the hollow echo of our own footsteps, and every so often I swore I heard sticks tapping together. Click, click, deep in the fog behind us. The fog never quite lifted, only stretched itself thinner as we hustled south. By what I guessed was late morning, my watch kept skipping minutes. We had chewed through nearly 20 miles of switchbacks. The pack straps sawed at my collarbones, but I refused to slow. Every birdsong perched above us in the canopy, as if the warblers were escorting our flight, but wouldn't dare land on the trail itself. Whenever I stopped to sip water, the woods went pin-drop still, then resumed the moment I moved again, like a show restarting after the critic leaves the room. We gained the spine below Chestnut Knob just before noon. Gray clouds stacked like stone blocks overhead, and the forest floor bled a sour metallic scent, wet pennies baked in sun that never reached the ground. Along a mossy cut bank, we found pine trunks, skinned of bark. The strips had been trimmed into human shapes and nailed head-high, all of them facing the cliff wall, as if some deranged sculptor wanted the effigies to watch the rock instead of the trail. Rust streaked under every nail, but when I touched the streaks, my fingers came away clean. The red was embedded in the wood grain itself, dark as dried liver. Jenna's breath started a quick cadence between her teeth. I tucked an arm around her pack and guided her forward, promising that 2 more ridges would drop us onto the service road. I no longer believed my own words. By deep afternoon, we found a sliver of level ground pressed tight against a shale cliff. No approach possible from behind, and only a 5-foot mouth for entry. We pitched the tent there, doors out, rain fly cinched low. I loaded both pistols and placed them within an easy reach. Jenna threaded our last length of paracord across the only entrance, hitching it to her titanium stakes and dangling my titanium mug so it would clang if anything brushed the line. Sunset never brightened. The clouds merely thickened until day and night became the same dark slate. Sometime past midnight. I know because my phone pinged once, then died. We both jerked awake to the faintest tink of metal, my mug shivering against itself. I rolled onto one elbow, pistol in hand, listening. Something crouched just outside the fly, breathing slow as a diver conserving air. The paracord twanged again, quieter, as though fingertips traced its length. Then a voice spoke inches from the nylon. "Why'd you bring the gun?" My own voice, tone, timbre, the hitch on the word gun I'd made earlier that day when coaxing Jenna downhill. A perfect mimic, whispered with the warmth leached out of it. The same sentence repeated, but now in Jenna's tone, fragile and cracking. She clamped a hand over her mouth. I felt her heartbeat banging through her wrist. I cleared my throat. "We're armed," I said, voice low but steady. "Step away now, or I will shoot." The forest exhaled. Cicadas, crickets, everything that had been humming went dead. A 2 count later, footsteps retreated. 2 measured paces, pause, 2 paces, like a drill squad marching in felt slippers. The cadence faded, but the hush remained, an oppressive vacuum that pressed against my eardrums until they rang. We lay awake until dawn seeped through the fly in a colorless smear. When I crawled out, my boots slid on damp shale. The paracord was gone, every inch of it, yet the stakes still stood. My mug lay on its side, handle threaded by a braided loop that hadn't existed the night before. Bootlaces, our bootlaces, had been sliced from both pairs of boots while we slept and woven into an elegant hangman's noose. A gray clay fingerprint smeared the tent zipper, flecked with grit that glittered like bone dust. Jenna stared, then turned the color of paste. We didn't speak. We broke camp in 6 minutes flat. No coffee, no filter stop. As we shouldered our packs, the clouds above the cliff tilted, and for the briefest heartbeat, I thought I saw a thin figure perched on the rock face itself, limbs folded like a mantis. A blink later, only wet shale remained. We started downhill, the trail slick and narrow. Behind us, far up the ridge, 2 sticks clacked together, talk, in perfect imitation of Jenna's laugh. I tightened my grip on the pistol and kept walking, counting each breath until I lost track of the number entirely. Wind scratched the ridge like sandpaper, but thunder refused to crack, just a low, endless growl that chased us down slope. GPS bars winked on and off, even though the sky stayed open. Every time the screen froze, the mileage ticked backward, chewing away our progress toward Burke's Garden. My watch claimed mid-morning, yet the air tasted of approaching night. We power-walked the narrow spine until the forest thinned into scrubby grass. That was where we saw it, the silhouette waiting on the next rise. Tall, too thin, shoulders draped in something that fluttered without wind. Its head listed to one side like a dog trying to puzzle a strange sound. Then, with brutal deliberation, it raised one impossibly long arm, no bend at the elbow, and pointed downhill, the same direction we were already moving. Jenna whispered, "It's hurting us." I could not disagree. We cut left onto the faint connector trail racing the slope. Minutes later, a sharp digital click broke the hush behind a maple trunk, followed by another farther uphill. When I searched the bark, I found a black cube. An old Bluetooth speaker wedged in a knothole, red light blinking. A delayed echo of our own footfalls spilled from it, 3 seconds behind. The tiny cadence ricocheted through the hollows, multiplying until it felt like dozens of boots closing in. I smashed the speaker with a rock. The moment the plastic cracked, a whistle erupted from somewhere beyond sight. An elk bugle, pitched far too low, vibrato so deep my ribs hummed. Birds pinwheeled from the canopy, some dropping stunned onto the duff. We had 2 trails left on the map, both through Dead Oaks Hollow. The first dissolved beneath a landslide, so we plunged into the second, a drainage choked with limestone and slick leaves. Halfway down, the ground opened under Jenna's boot. She yelped, flailing, and I grabbed her pack just in time, pulling her back from the lip of a sinkhole maybe 15 feet across and twice that deep. Its floor looked like a trophy dump. Deer mandibles, bare jaws, a mountain lion skull bleached white, human teeth, molars, incisors, glinted among the bones like seashells on dark sand. A fresh pair of upper incisors rested on a flat rock, the roots still pink. I gagged. Above us, voices began to chant in unison, neither loud nor hurried, coordinates read out in monotone, descending numbers between each line. 13, 12, 11. Figures ringed the sinkhole rim, a full circle of pale watchers crouched so low, their wrists dangled past their knees. They rocked together, synchronized, until their joints popped like breaking sticks. Lightning finally tore open the clouds. In the flash, every watcher stood at full height, arms spread, ragged bark capes snapping like cloth. Thunder hammered the basin. A slab of limestone sheared off the lip and crashed into the sinkhole, tilting high enough to form a rough ramp. "Move!" I shoved Jenna up the rock and scrambled behind her. Limestone rang beneath our boots. Someone, slid after us, bare feet slapping in counter rhythm. But the next lightning strike blinded my night vision, and all I saw were after images. We broke into a downhill sprint, branches clawing our packs, the slope steep enough to tumble if we missed a step. Behind us, the coordinated stomp of many feet burst into a run. No shouts, no barking dogs, only that same precise cadence driving faster. At the service road, a hunter's truck idled, tailgate open, decoys rattling in the bed. I waved both arms, gun still in my hand. The man's eyes went wide. He thumbed the safety off his shotgun but didn't raise it. Jenna collapsed beside the bumper, sobbing. Gravel dust rose behind us, but nothing emerged from the tree line. Forest Ranger Hal Teague arrived 10 minutes later in a green pickup. He listened in silence while I poured out the story, leaving out nothing this time. When I finished, he rubbed the brim of his hat and asked only one question. "You two crossed Dead Oaks Hollow?" We nodded. "Locals call them Ridge Watchers," he said, voice soft enough I almost missed it. "They follow noise. Don't let a thing go that rattles the ridge after dark." He offered hot coffee in a paper cup. I wrapped trembling fingers around it, then froze. The cup's handle was looped by a neat braided string, my bootlace, though I had replaced the laces with paracord that morning. 3 weeks later, back home in Richmond, a padded envelope arrived with no return address. Inside lay the splintered warning board from the kiosk and a micro SD card labeled 2:03 a.m. in cramped graphite. I slid the card into my laptop. A single audio file played. My own voice whispered, "Why'd you bring the gun?" 13 times, flawless and cold, each repetition tailed by a wet exhale that fogged the laptop microphone somehow on the recording itself. When the loop ended, a faint click-click echoed, like sticks tapping out Jenna's laughter. I keep the board locked in the attic. Some nights, quiet nights after dark, I swear I hear that distant whistle, impossibly low, threading through the rafters while the house holds its breath. It was Drew's idea, like it usually was when we ended up doing something dumb but well-intentioned. He called me after 8 months of silence, no texts, no memes, not even a Merry Christmas, just a one-line message at 2:04 in the morning. "You still hike?" I didn't respond right away. Truth was, I hadn't hit a trail in over a year. Work, a breakup, and the kind of creeping exhaustion that settles in your bones had kept me firmly planted indoors. But something about the timing, about the way Drew asked, made me say yes without even asking where. We met up in Asheville 3 days later. He looked rough, pale, gaunt around the eyes, like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. But when I asked about it, he shrugged it off, said he just needed to get out of the city, clear his head, breathe real air again. And I didn't push because frankly I needed the same. Drew had picked the spot, an isolated stretch of the Appalachian Trail near the Tennessee-North Carolina border. We'd hike for 4 days, circle back using a fire road, and crash in the truck. No service, no noise, just miles of nothing. It sounded perfect. I should have asked him why he picked that spot. Should have asked a lot of things, really. We parked his rust-bitten Tacoma on an overgrown shoulder near an old mile marker. The trailhead wasn't labeled on any map I had. Drew just said, "Trust me, it connects in," and pointed uphill to a faded break in the trees. The path was narrow, overgrown in places, and I could feel the wetness of the moss through the sides of my boots within the first 20 minutes. The air was heavy, damp, like the woods had just finished raining even though the sky was clear. It smelled old, earthy, but not the good kind. More like mildew and forgotten things. Every step kicked up the scent of rotting leaves and mud. Still, we laughed a lot that first day. Talked about the usual, exes, jobs, dumb crap from high school. Drew seemed like himself again. That night, we set up camp in a shallow basin next to a dry creek bed, just a flat enough patch to drop our gear. We cooked some ramen on my jet boil and passed a tiny flask back and forth until the stars came out in full. Around midnight, the forest got too quiet. It wasn't gradual. One second we could hear the rustle of squirrels, the buzz of insects, the occasional flap of something big in the trees. The next, it was like someone had hit mute on the whole world. The fire still crackled. Drew's breathing was steady, but beyond that, nothing. I sat up, suddenly alert. "Do you hear that?" He didn't say anything, just nodded, eyes fixed on the dark tree line beyond the fire. That's when we heard it, this low grinding noise. Not footsteps, not a growl. It sounded like someone dragging a bag of rocks through wet gravel. Long, slow, pausing every few seconds. It moved just beyond the trees where the firelight faded to black. We didn't speak, didn't move, just listened. It circled, slowly, like it was checking us out. When it stopped, Drew whispered, "Don't move, it's circling." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. My skin felt electric, my body coiled tight like a spring. I grabbed the hatchet near my sleeping bag and held it low. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. I don't know. At some point, I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, the sky was turning gray and the fire had burned to ash. The woods were noisy again, birds chirping, a squirrel scampering up a trunk like nothing had happened. Drew was already awake, standing at the edge of camp with his arms folded. I walked up next to him and followed his gaze. Boot prints, deep ones, not ours. They circled the camp in a wide arc, maybe 15 feet out, where the brush was just thick enough that you wouldn't see someone unless you were looking for them. Drew didn't say anything, just turned and started packing up. We hit the trail again around 7 a.m. Both of us were quieter, not as quick with the jokes. There was this shared understanding between us now, unspoken but heavy. Something had been watching us last night. And it wasn't a bear, or a deer, or anything that belonged out here. We hiked most of the day without seeing anyone. No other hikers, no trail markers, not even the occasional candy wrapper left behind by an amateur. It felt like we were the last two people on the trail. At one point, I checked my phone just to see the time and noticed something weird. The time was wrong, off by 2 hours. I laughed at first, thought I must have hit daylight savings or messed with the settings. But Drew checked his watch and went pale. Same thing. We both had different brands, mine digital, his analog, but both were off, exactly 2 hours behind. "No way both of them are busted," I said. Drew didn't answer, just looked back over his shoulder, scanning the trees like he was expecting something to step out of them. The rest of the day passed in a fog. At some point, we found an old overhang. Looked like it used to be a trail shelter before it collapsed in on itself. The beams were weather-worn and splintered. Roof caved in like it had given up fighting gravity. We didn't stop, just moved past it and kept walking. And that's when we saw him, a man, walking the opposite direction, maybe 50 yards ahead, just stepping slowly down the trail like he had nowhere to be. At first, I was relieved. Another person. Proof we weren't alone out here. But something felt off immediately. He was barefoot, filthy. His shirt was torn, hanging off one shoulder, and he was carrying a bundle of sticks in one hand, like carrying them, not in a pack, just bundled in his arms like a toddler holding toys. We stepped aside to let him pass. He didn't look at us, didn't say a word, just walked straight down the trail, eyes locked on the dirt like he was afraid to look up. Drew muttered under his breath, What the hell was that? I didn't answer. My mouth was dry, tongue stuck to the roof like I hadn't drunk in days. I watched the man disappear around a bend and felt this pressure in my chest, like the woods were holding their breath again. We made camp early that night, just before sunset. Drew didn't speak much while we set up, just went through the motions: tent, food, fire, like a man on autopilot. When it got dark, we didn't tell stories or pull out the flask. We just sat there, watching the woods, listening. And that's when we heard it again. 3 short whistles, sharp, deliberate. We both froze. Then the sound of something stepping just beyond the trees. 1 step, pause, another, pause, closer. Drew whispered, "That's not the same thing from last night." I didn't answer. I just gripped the hatchet and prayed it would leave us alone. But deep down, I knew something had followed us. Something was out there, and it knew we were here. The morning after the whistles, neither of us said a word about what we'd heard. Maybe we were too afraid to put it into words. Maybe it felt safer to pretend it didn't happen. But the silence between us wasn't normal. It was sharp, tense, like a wire pulled tight between 2 people trying not to panic. We broke camp faster than usual. No coffee, no breakfast. Just packed our gear with stiff fingers and got moving before the sun had fully cleared the trees. The trail was wrong. I don't know how else to put it. The path looked the same, but the woods felt off. The spacing of the trees was too even, like they'd been planted, and I swear they were closer together than they'd been yesterday. The light filtered through the branches in thin, pale streaks that didn't feel like sunlight. It looked like the glow off a TV screen in a dark room, cold and artificial. An hour in, we found the first marker. It was carved into a tree trunk. Deep gouges in the bark, done recently. At first I thought it was trail graffiti, until I got closer and saw the shape. 3 straight vertical slashes, evenly spaced. Not letters, not a hiker's initials. It looked more like tally marks. But there were only 3, like someone or something was keeping track. We pushed on, trying to stay calm. But the deeper we went, the more signs we saw. Not just carvings, stones stacked into little pyramids beside the trail, with tufts of fur wedged between them, twine hanging from branches in haphazard knots. Once, we passed a log covered in dozens of dead moths, wings splayed like they'd been arranged there. Drew didn't say much, but I caught him looking over his shoulder constantly, and he started mumbling, just little things under his breath. "Don't look at it," or "keep walking," over and over like a mantra. I finally stopped him. "What's going on, man?" He looked at me, eyes glassy. "I've been here before." My stomach dropped. "What?" I don't mean literally. Not like I remember hiking this part. But I know this place. I've seen it. In dreams. That tree." He pointed to a crooked cedar split down the middle by lightning. "I've seen that tree a dozen times." "You didn't tell me you'd been dreaming about this." He didn't answer, just started walking again. By midday, it felt like we were the only people left in the world. No birds, no bugs, just the sound of our own breathing and the crunch of boots on damp leaves. And that's when we saw the footprints. Not ours, not from boots, bare feet. One set. Deep heel impressions, long toes, wide apart, like someone or something had been running barefoot along the trail, and they were fresh. We stopped dead. The prints curved off the path and into the woods. I could see the trail they left behind in the undergrowth, bent grass, disturbed leaves. It wasn't random. It was like it wanted us to see where it had gone. "We should turn around," I said. Drew shook his head slowly. "We won't get out that way." "You don't know that." He looked at me, and there was something behind his eyes that made my stomach twist, like he wasn't sure if we'd ever get out. We followed the trail for another hour, then came upon a structure. It wasn't on any map, just a single rotting shelter buried deep in the woods. Old ranger station, maybe. The roof sagged like a broken spine, windows boarded, the door hanging off its hinges. I didn't want to go in. Every part of me screamed not to. But Drew was already stepping through the threshold. Inside it was worse. The air was thick, foul, like old meat and mold. The The walls were covered in claw marks, not scratches, gouges, deep enough that flakes of wood curled at the edges. Something had torn through here, recently. In the corner was a pile of bones, small ones, animal probably, but they were laid out in a pattern, symmetrical, deliberate, skulls stacked on top of each other like a totem, and next to it, a pile of clothes, folded, clean, too clean, a faded hoodie, hiking pants, a baseball cap with a tiny patch that said Wander More. There was a name stitched into the jacket collar, Ryan S. Drew said nothing, just stared at the clothes like they were radioactive. Then we heard it again. The whistle, 3 notes, this time closer, right outside. Drew turned to me slowly. It's hunting. No, I said, backing away. It's toying with us. We bolted out of the station and ran, full sprint, packs bouncing, lungs on fire. We didn't stop until we were halfway down a ravine, gasping and soaked in sweat. That's when I realized my GPS wasn't in my pocket anymore. Gone. Just gone. I'd checked it maybe 10 minutes earlier. No way it fell out. It was taken. Mine's dead, Drew said, holding up his screen. It was cracked straight down the middle. The display flickered once and shut off for good. We sat there in silence for a while, listening to the forest breathe. The sun was going down behind the ridge. We didn't have long. We need to make camp, I said. Set a fire. Keep watch. Drew nodded but didn't move, and then he whispered something that chilled me more than anything that day. I don't think we're on the trail anymore. I looked around. He was right. The path we'd been following wasn't a trail. Not really. No markers. No blazes. Just a worn line through the trees that we'd been blindly following, thinking it would lead somewhere safe. But it didn't. It was a path meant for something else. We didn't sleep that night. We built a fire and took turns watching it, listening for the whistle. It didn't come. That somehow made it worse. At least before, we knew where it was. Now, it could have been anywhere, all around us. Or maybe it was just waiting. The woods didn't feel like woods anymore. They felt like a maze, like we'd crossed some invisible line and the rules no longer applied. When the sun came up, if you could even call it that, we packed up and tried to backtrack. We figured if we could retrace our steps to the ranger station, maybe we'd find something that pointed us toward a real trail. But the ravine we'd scrambled down? Gone. Just a flat stretch of moss and deadfall. The ranger station? Nowhere. Maybe we missed it, I said, even though I knew we didn't. Drew didn't respond. His face had gone pale again, and his left eye had started twitching every couple of minutes. He looked like he was falling apart from the inside out. I don't think it wants us to leave, he finally whispered. We kept walking. After a few hours, we hit a clearing, a wide circular opening in the trees. No sound, no birds, just a field of stones, big flat slabs laid out in tight, unnatural rows. Some were cracked, others looked like they'd been burned, and in the center, a tree, dead, blackened, split right down the middle. At its base, something had been carved into the wood. Come closer. Drew just stared at it, like it was calling his name. I grabbed his arm. We're not going near that thing. He didn't argue. Just let me pull him away. That's when we heard it. Not the whistle this time. It was our voices, my voice, Drew's voice, coming from the woods. It said, this way, then, help, and then, laughing, mocking, like it was trying to remember how to be human, but got the tone wrong. Off, just enough to make your skin crawl. We ran. The path was uneven, roots rising to grab our boots, branches clawing at our arms. I lost track of how long we moved like that, ducking, stumbling, shoving through brush like we were being chased even when nothing was behind us. Eventually we hit another trail, a real one. I recognized the markers, white rectangles on the trees, Appalachian Trail blaze. I nearly cried, but Drew wasn't celebrating. He just stood there, staring into the woods. It let us find it, he said. It wants something. What the hell are you talking about? He looked at me, expression flat. We're not both getting out. No, I said, backing away. Don't do this. But he was already taking off his pack. dropping it in the middle of the trail. "You've got a wife, a real life back home. I don't. This thing, it followed me first." I grabbed him by the jacket. "I'm not leaving you out here." And that's when we heard it. Footsteps, not shuffling, not creeping, running, fast, heavy, right toward us. We turned and bolted. Whatever it was behind us, close. I could hear the snap of branches, feel the vibration in the ground. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We ran until my lungs felt like they were filled with glass. My legs barely worked. Drew was falling behind. He stumbled once, hard, rolled down a slope and hit a tree with a sickening crunch. I stopped, turned back. He wasn't moving. The thing was close now, too close. I could hear it breathing. Wet, rattling breaths. I had to make a choice. I turned and ran. I ran until I saw a clearing and the glint of metal, a trail sign. Bent, rusted, half covered in vines, but real. I followed it, crashing through the underbrush until I saw a gravel road. A ranger truck, a man in uniform. I don't remember what I said. I think I screamed. He grabbed me, hauled me into the truck, and drove. He didn't ask questions, didn't talk, just kept his eyes on the road. We drove for maybe 20 minutes before I caught my breath enough to speak. "My friend, Drew, he's still out there." The ranger didn't look at me. He just muttered, "You're lucky it let you go." "What are you talking about? What is that thing?" He finally turned his head just enough for me to see the deep lines in his face. "We get a few like you every couple years. Pairs mostly. One gets out, one doesn't." I stared at him. "So what? You just leave them?" "We've tried," he said. "Sent teams in, dogs, drones. Sometimes we find pieces, sometimes we don't. It's not our land, not really." We rode in silence after that. Back at the station, they gave me water. Took a statement I barely remember giving. Told me someone would look into it, but I could see it in their eyes. They already knew how this ended. But Drew made it. 3 days later, a rescue team found him wandering down a game trail, 6 miles from where I'd left him. Shirt shredded, shoes gone, blood crusted down one side of his face. He was muttering something about names and mirrors. They sedated him on the spot. He doesn't talk anymore, not to me, not to anyone. He moved to New Mexico, changed his name, deleted every trace of his old life. Sometimes I text him, just to see if he's still there. He never replies. As for me, I moved out of the city, don't hike anymore. I stay away from wooded areas. I don't go near parks. Sometimes I catch myself listening too closely at night, waiting for the wind to shift. And once, just once, I swear I heard it again. 3 sharp whistles, and my voice calling from the trees. I didn't grow up with ghost stories. I didn't grow up believing in curses, forest spirits, or anything that couldn't be measured or explained. My family wasn't superstitious. We were practical. We believed in what we could see, touch, quantify. That's probably why I didn't take Everett seriously when he grabbed my arm that night, his nails digging into my skin, eyes glassy and wide. "If the woods go quiet, you stop. Don't talk, don't run, don't turn around." That's what he told me. I should have listened. Everett lived out past Blue Ridge, in this patch of the Georgia mountains where the trees felt older than time. His cabin was one of those places that never had good cell reception, never got mail delivered directly, and somehow always smelled like damp stone. I'd driven in that afternoon to grab the will paperwork he'd finally gotten around to finalizing. He wasn't dying, but he looked like he was getting there. Thin, pale, like something had hollowed him out from the inside. He wasn't eating. Said the woods had been too loud lately, then too quiet. Whatever the hell that meant. His windows were covered in newspaper and black duct tape. He'd unplugged his fridge, covered all the mirrors, and kept bundles of sage hanging above every doorframe. It looked less like a house, and more like a bunker for someone who thought the trees were conspiring against him. When I asked about the blackout curtains, he just said, "They don't like to be watched." I laughed. He didn't. When I stood up to leave, Everett didn't follow me to the door. He jumped ahead of me and blocked it, clutching the frame like he thought it might vanish if he let go. "Just stay the night," he said. "I'll drive you back at first light. It's safer that way. It's 1.5 miles, I said. I know the trail. I've done it 100 times. I'll be home in less than an hour. Everett stepped aside, but not before pulling something from his pocket. A small cloth pouch tied shut with a knot of red twine. "Take this," he said. "Don't open it. Don't lose it." "What is it?" "Salt, bones, a few teeth, stuff it doesn't like." I shoved it in my jacket just to make him feel better, and promised to text when I made it back to the trailhead. He didn't smile, didn't even wave, just stood there on his porch as I walked off, eyes locked on the tree line like he expected it to move. And for a while, everything was fine. The trail was familiar, narrow, winding, but clearly marked. Light bled through the trees in thin golden strands, and the air was crisp, still clinging to that late autumn chill. I kept a steady pace, earbuds in, just wanting to get home before my mom started blowing up my phone. I was about 1/4 mile in when I noticed it, the silence. Not the peaceful kind either. The kind that makes your stomach tighten before your brain even catches up. No wind, no crunch underfoot. Even my own footsteps sounded muted. I paused, pulled out one earbud, and realized the forest wasn't just quiet, it was dead. No birds, no insects, nothing. I don't know how long I stood there before I realized I was holding my breath. I took a step forward, something shifted in the corner of my vision. Just trees. Another step. A low, creaking noise echoed from behind me, like a tree groaning under its own weight. I kept walking. That's when I smelled it. Something foul, heavy, and sweet, like meat left in a plastic bag on a hot day. It hit my nose like a slap and lingered in the back of my throat. I covered my mouth with my sleeve, eyes watering. I don't know why I looked left. Maybe instinct, maybe stupidity. But through the thick brush, just past the slope of the ridge, I saw something standing between two trees. At first I thought it was a person, just a man watching me from a distance, but it didn't move. It didn't breathe. Its arms were too long, hands drooping low enough to brush the tops of its knees. The legs were bent like a deer's, and its skin, what I could see of it, looked leathery, like it had been stretched too tight over the bones. And its face, God, its face, it had a mouth, a human one, full of teeth, too many teeth, and eyes like open coals glowing just faintly in the dimming light. Like they weren't reflecting light but making it. I blinked. It was gone. I laughed, mostly out of panic, and forced myself to keep walking. I told myself I'd imagined it. Some illusion from the shadows, my brain playing tricks. That's what I told myself. That's what I needed to believe. Because if I didn't, I'd have to accept that Everett wasn't crazy, that he was right, that there's something in those woods that watches you when the air goes still. My shoe came untied about halfway through. I bent down to fix it, hands shaking more than I'd like to admit. As I did, something snapped in the trees ahead. Not a twig, a crack, like something heavy had stepped on a branch without caring how much noise it made. I froze. Another snap, this time closer. I stood up fast, tied or not, and started walking. Not running, just walking. That's what Everett said, right? Don't run, don't talk, don't look back. I tried to hum, keep myself calm, but even my voice sounded swallowed up, like the trees were listening. Then I heard it, singing, low, feminine. No words, just a tune, carried by a voice that sounded human, almost, but there was something off. Notes held too long, vibrato where there shouldn't be any. A voice that sounded practiced, like it had learned the song by watching people sing, but never tried it until now. It came from behind me. I didn't turn around. The sound moved, circling to my right, then to my left, then above. I told myself it was an echo, just sound bouncing off rocks or cliffs or whatever. But the air was too flat, too thick. That's when I felt the breath, hot and rancid, hitting the back of my neck like someone was standing an inch behind me. I closed my eyes, took one step forward, then another. The singing stopped. Everything stopped. I heard my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, heard the crunch of gravel beneath me again finally, like the trail had come back online. I opened my eyes and nearly cried from relief when I saw the old mile marker nailed to a tree ahead. I was halfway there. Just keep walking. There's a weird kind of silence that comes after something terrifying. Not peaceful, not even still, just hollow, like the world is holding its breath. That's what the trail felt like as I passed that old mile marker and stepped deeper into the trees. I kept thinking, just a little farther, but my legs were tight with tension, and my back felt like it was being watched, scanned. I hadn't seen that thing again, but the memory of it was burned into me. That mouth, those eyes, the way it just vanished. I kept my pace steady. No running, no talking, just walking, like Everett said. I even kept my eyes down, watching the dirt, the scattered leaves, the faint depressions in the path. That's probably why I almost missed it. The second mile marker. I blinked at it, confused. It looked exactly the same as the one I'd already passed. Same angle, same faded white numbers, same nail poking out just a little too far. I reached out, hesitating, and ran my fingers along the cracked wood. It was the same. Not just a copy, the same one. I hadn't gone in a circle. The trail didn't loop. There were no offshoots. I knew this part of the AT like the back of my hand, but somehow, I was back where I started. That was the first time I really started to panic. I turned slowly, trying not to make any sudden moves. Nothing but trees. Nothing but mist in the far-off pines. The sun had dipped below the horizon completely now, and the forest was cast in that final blue haze just before full dark. And then I heard the laughter. Children. Not happy laughter, not innocent. This laughter was dry and mean, like kids daring each other to poke a dead animal with a stick. It echoed weirdly, bouncing between the trees in short bursts, rising and falling like waves. I froze. Then it got louder. One voice, then two, then more. It sounded like they were running around me, fast. Their footsteps were impossible, light but quick, circling, weaving, closing in. I turned in a slow circle, heart thudding, and still saw nothing. That's when one of them whispered my name. Not screamed, not called, whispered right into my ear. I spun, swinging wildly behind me, but nothing was there. My flashlight nearly slipped from my hand. Another whisper. This time from the other side. Then a giggle, and another voice. My own voice, mimicking the way I'd said I know the trail back at Everett's house. Word for word. Same tone, but it was wrong. A fraction too slow. The cadence just slightly off. Like it was trying to understand the way I spoke, but hadn't figured it out completely. I started moving again, fast. Not running, but not calm either. Every shadow looked like it was about to reach out and grab me. The trees leaned a little too far into the trail, like they were listening, watching. I pulled out my phone. No service, no signal, just a blinking red battery icon. Figures. Then for a split second I saw myself. At first I thought it was a reflection, a trick of the light. But it was me, my clothes, my face, everything, standing just off the trail to my right. Head tilted, arms limp, a mirror image. Except it was smiling. A big, toothy, unblinking smile that felt like a mask stretched too tight. I didn't scream, I couldn't. My throat locked up. I just stared, heart frozen in my chest, as it raised one hand and slowly mimicked a wave. Then it walked backward into the woods, not turned. Walked backward. Its knees bent the wrong way. I couldn't help it. I ran. I know Everett said not to, but every instinct in my body took over. I tore down the trail, branches slicing at my arms, my jacket snagging on thorns. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just ran. And then the trail disappeared. It didn't end. It didn't split. It just vanished. One moment it was beneath my feet. The next, I was standing in thick undergrowth, surrounded by trees that didn't look familiar. My flashlight flickered. I turned in every direction. No trail markers, no path, just woods. Endless swallowing woods. The stench returned, coppery, rotting, thick in the air. It clung to the inside of my nostrils. My flashlight flickered again, then died. And that's when I heard it again. The song. Same voice, same lullaby, only this time it was closer, directly in front of me, and something moved. I don't mean a shadow or a blur. I mean the space in front of me shifted, like the air had folded inward, and something stepped through. A tall, spindly shape emerged from between the trees, its body so thin it looked like it had been starved for years. It walked with this slow, graceful bend, like it was sniffing the air. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Its head snapped toward me. It had no eyes, just sockets filled with that same burning red glow. The grin widened. Then it started humming. I turned and bolted. I didn't care if I was making noise. I didn't care if it was a mistake. I needed out. The thing didn't chase me with footsteps. It chased me with sound. Every time I thought I'd gotten some distance, it was there again, closer, louder, humming in that same terrible tone that somehow knew every nerve to twist. I stumbled, fell hard, slammed my shoulder into a rock. My flashlight hit the ground and cracked open, the batteries popping loose. My vision swam, and then I felt it, fingers, long, ice cold, wrapping around my ankle. I kicked, screamed. My boot caught something solid and whatever it was let go. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I don't remember the next part clearly, just flashes, trees rushing past, blood running down my leg, a noise behind me like someone breathing through a throat full of water. Then, pavement. Just like that, I was on asphalt. The trailhead parking lot. My car was there, empty, waiting. I collapsed against the hood, crying, shaking. I don't remember unlocking the door, don't remember driving home. The next thing I remember clearly is my bedroom, my bed, my ceiling fan slowly spinning above me, my clothes still damp with sweat and dirt, and something else, something worse. A strip of dirty fabric in my jacket pocket, red and frayed, soaked in something dark. When I touched it, the humming started again, this time from inside my closet. But that wasn't what woke me. It was the humming, low, barely audible, like it was coming through the walls. I sat there for a full minute, clutching my sheets, staring at the closet. The door was cracked open just an inch, just enough for darkness to spill out. I got up slowly and crossed the room. Every step felt like walking into a minefield. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind the door, crouched, waiting. When I finally yanked it open, there was nothing. Just clothes, shoes, the usual clutter. But that smell, the rot, the wet copper, the scent of it, still hung in the air like fog. I slammed the door shut and didn't open it again. Later that morning I noticed something else. My backpack was still zipped and untouched from the night before. But when I opened it, there was something tucked inside the main compartment. A folded piece of old fabric, flannel, torn, faded red, Everett's shirt, I didn't pack that. And stitched crudely into the corner, just barely visible in the light, was my name. Not written, not labeled, stitched. The thread was dark and stiff, like it had been soaked in something thick. Blood maybe, or worse. I dropped it immediately and backed away like it was a live grenade. That was the moment I realized. Whatever I saw out there didn't stay out there. It followed me. The humming returned that night, closer now, inside the house. I tried everything, lights on, windows locked, sage smudging, even salt across the thresholds. It didn't matter. The lights would flicker and dim. The salt lines would smear on their own. And no matter how loud I played music or the TV, I could still hear it, right underneath. The same lullaby looping endlessly. And the laughter, the children, they giggled from under my bed. They whispered from inside the walls. Once I walked into the bathroom and saw handprints on the fogged-up mirror, child-sized, smudged, moving. I stopped looking in mirrors after that. Then Everett showed up, unannounced, just after sunset. I don't know how he got there. His truck wasn't outside. One second I was checking the window, and the next he was knocking at my door. When I opened it, I almost slammed it shut again. He looked off. Not just tired, not just sick, wrong. His skin was almost gray, his eyes sunken deep in their sockets, but somehow glowing faintly beneath the surface. And he was smiling, not a normal smile. One that looked glued in place, like it was stretched too far, too wide. "I forgot to give you the final page," he said, holding up a crumpled envelope. I didn't take it. He tilted his head slightly. "You saw it, didn't you?" I didn't respond. Couldn't. My throat felt like it had been stapled shut. Everett leaned in closer. "I told you not to run." His eyes flashed red. Then he turned, stepped off my porch, and walked straight into the woods behind my house. No flashlight, no hesitation, and vanished. I didn't move for hours. I just sat on the couch with every light in the house on, clutching a fire poker like it would do any good. When I finally stood up to check the yard, there were no footprints. No sign he'd ever been there. And then I saw it. In the backyard, something was standing just beyond the tree line. Tall, bony, silhouetted against the night. It waved, slowly, like it was learning. I shut the blinds. That night I dreamed of it, of me. But it wasn't me. It was my body, yes, my face, my voice. But inside it was something hollow, smiling, hungry. It walked through my house, opened my drawers, touched my things, practiced my laugh. And when it looked in the mirror, it seemed to shudder with joy. Then I woke up to find my closet open again. The next few days were a blur. Time stopped making sense. I'd lose hours at a time. Black out while brushing my teeth, only to come to with the water running and the room dark. I'd hear myself talking in the other room, but I'd be alone. Once I woke up outside, just lying on the grass in my backyard, barefoot, my door still locked, and always, that feeling of being watched. Like I wasn't just being followed, like I was being replaced. The final straw came 3 nights ago. I caught it, not clearly, not in full, but in the hallway mirror. I turned the corner, and for a split second it didn't move the way I did. It was just slightly off. The head tilted too late, the smile too quick. Its eyes glowed faintly before vanishing. I smashed the mirror with a chair. I've smashed every mirror in the house since. Covered the TV with a blanket. I don't take photos. I don't go near reflective glass. I don't even look in puddles when it rains. It's still here, somewhere. Sometimes I hear it pacing upstairs. Sometimes I hear me humming in the next room, when I know I'm alone. Once I swear I saw my own face staring back at me through the window, from the outside. I don't sleep much anymore. I don't leave either. Something tells me if I try, it'll take that as an invitation. Everett warned me, not just about the rules, but what happens if you break them, if you speak, if you run, if you bring it back. Tonight I found something in my drawer, a piece of old flannel, stitched into the edge, Everett's name. I think it's learning to switch hosts. So if you're reading this, and you're thinking about hiking the Appalachian Trail, do yourself a favor. If the woods go quiet, stop. If you hear singing, don't answer. And whatever you do, don't look into the trees. Because if it sees you, it won't forget your face, and it always finds its way home. I moved into the cabin on a cloudy Thursday, the kind of overcast that turns everything dull and flat like someone drained the color out of the sky. No fanfare, no welcome basket from the town. Just me, 2 duffel bags, and a rusted U-Haul trailer that barely made it through the switchbacks. The real estate agent ghosted after the final payment cleared, and the previous owner hadn't left so much as a note. Just dust, mold, and the weirdest goddamn feeling every time I looked out the back windows into the trees. But still, I liked it. It was quiet. The property backed right up against an old section of the Appalachian Trail. Not an official part anymore, from what I gathered, but the ridgeline snaked through dense old forest just past the fence. No neighbors, no noise, no cops. I figured it was perfect. A place to disconnect, reset. Turns out there was a reason it was so cheap. I didn't meet anyone in town until the weekend. Place was called Stag Hollow, population maybe 200. Mostly older folks, a handful of younger ones who looked like they'd been trying to leave since high school. It was one of those towns that had a single road, a gas station with a beer cooler, and a cafe that doubled as a post office. Most people didn't say much to me. They just stared. Except for Nolan. He ran the bait shop that also passed for a general store. I was grabbing a few basics, eggs, ramen, batteries, when he finally spoke up from behind the counter. "You the one bought that cabin up by mile 7? I nodded. "Yeah, moved in a few days ago. You know it?" He grunted. "Everyone knows it." Something about the way he said it made my skin itch. "You planning on hiking that trail behind it?" he asked, voice low and even. "Yeah," I said. "That's kind of why I picked the place. Figured it'd be nice to have it right in my backyard." Nolan stopped bagging my groceries and met my eyes. "If you go past mile marker 7, don't stop. And if you see bones, skulls especially, you go around them. Don't touch them. Don't even look too long." I laughed, just a little. He didn't. "The hell does that mean?" I asked, trying to keep it light. He didn't answer, just handed me the bag and said, "Good luck out there." The first week was uneventful. The house creaked like it was alive. Pipes groaned when I ran the water, and there was a spot near the fridge where the floor dipped just enough to trip me every time. But the forest? The forest was beautiful. Thick trees, big mossy stones, and the kind of quiet that settles in your chest like a long exhale. I started hiking every morning, just an hour or two, following the trail behind the property, deeper into the woods. The blazes were faded and half the trees were overgrown, but the path was still there, pressed into the earth like a vein. I passed mile marker 5 on the second day, a slab of old wood nailed into a tree, barely legible. By the end of the week, I reached marker 7. That's when things started to feel different. There was nothing obvious at first. No jump scares, no sudden storm clouds, just stillness, the kind that feels heavy, like the whole forest is waiting for something. That's also when I saw the first bones. It was a squirrel, I think. Hard to tell. The skull was small, teeth still intact. The body was gone, but the bones had been arranged into a little circle. Skull right in the center. Deliberate. Precise. I stopped, bent over, stared at it for a moment. Then I remembered what Nolan said. I stood, walked around it. It rattled in my head for the rest of the day. Who the hell stacks animal bones in the middle of the trail like that? Kids? Hunters? Something about it felt wrong. Like it was meant to be there. I didn't sleep great that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see that little skull staring back at me. By the following week, they were everywhere. Bird bones strung up in little stick cradle nests, hanging from tree branches. A row of raccoon skulls lined up along a log like they were on display, and always at or just beyond mile 7. The deeper I went, the more intricate the displays became. Bones stacked like cairns, arranged in spirals. Sometimes there were symbols carved into the dirt, circular, jagged, impossible to make out unless you were looking right at them. I told myself it was some weird forest art thing, that I was being paranoid. But I kept walking around them. Then came the deer skull. Big, clean, no blood. It was resting in the exact center of the path, perfectly positioned, antlers intact. Both eye sockets pointed directly up the trail toward me. I stopped cold. Something about it chilled me. My gut screamed, "Don't touch it." I thought about Nolan's voice, the way it dropped an octave when he warned me. But I was tired, sweaty, annoyed. I grabbed a long stick, hooked it through one of the antler holes, and shoved it off the trail into the brush. "Not today," I muttered, like I was doing a chore. And that's when the forest got quiet. I didn't notice it right away. I was already walking again, maybe 20 or 30 yards down the trail, when I realized there were no birds. No crickets. No breeze. The only sound was my boots crunching dead leaves. Everything else had vanished. I turned around and stared back at the path. I couldn't see the skull anymore, but I felt it, like something was still looking at me. That night, the house groaned louder than usual, the kind of creaks that sound like footsteps, floorboards flexing under weight. At first I chalked it up to wind, then I heard it, breathing, slow, wet, coming from directly beneath my bed. I froze, didn't even breathe, just laid there in the dark, muscles locked, ears straining. The breathing stopped, then the laughter started, high, raspy, like a man pretending to laugh. 3 short bursts, then silence. I didn't move until morning. I tried to pretend it was a dream, tried to shake it off, told myself I'd imagined it. Stress, isolation. Maybe the house had mice or raccoons or something. Happens in old cabins all the time. But when I opened the front door the next morning, there were muddy footprints on the porch. Bare, human-shaped, each toe too long and curved. They led straight up to the door and stopped. The porch light burned out 2 nights after the deer skull. I hadn't even touched it. Just opened the door after sunset to check on a noise, and pop, gone. The bulb was brand new. That wasn't what got to me, though. It was what I found underneath it, a handprint. It wasn't mine, too big, too long, smudged into the dust on the door like it had pressed hard, slow. The fingers dragged downward before pulling away. That night, I locked every window and slept with the kitchen knife under my pillow. At 3:12 a.m., I woke up choking on the smell of wet dog and copper. Something was breathing at the bedroom window. Slow, animal breaths with the occasional hitch, like it was trying to remember how. I didn't dare look. My curtain was thin enough to see movement through, and I could already make out the silhouette. Too tall, hunched, shoulders like spears. It stayed there for 20 minutes, just breathing. Then it tapped the glass, once, and laughed. I was already losing it, and I knew it. I didn't go back into the woods for days. I stayed inside, paced circles around the house, and kept a hammer next to me when I showered. On the 4th day, I convinced myself it was over. That maybe it had just been some, wild dog, drifter messing with me. Rationalizing was easier than thinking about the alternative. So I went back on the trail. Mid-afternoon, sunny, birds chirping, normal enough. I even remember feeling silly, like maybe I'd overreacted. The woods looked just like they always did. Still, quiet, peaceful. But then I got to the spot. The deer skull was back, exactly where it had been the first time. Clean, dry, antlers perfectly intact, like I'd never moved it, like it never left. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't touch it this time. Just stood there, heart thudding, that pressure again, like the trees were leaning in, holding their breath, watching to see what I'd do. I walked around it, didn't say a word, didn't even curse under my breath. Just got off the trail and stepped wide into the undergrowth, ignoring the briars, and got back home fast. That night, it followed me. It started with the scratching, not at the windows, not under the bed, inside the walls, soft at first, like a mouse, then deeper, wet, like something was digging with claws. By midnight, the scratching turned into thuds, something slamming itself against the drywall. I called the sheriff. They sent Deputy Roach. Guy couldn't have been older than 25. Showed up with a flashlight and an empty notepad, asked if I'd been drinking. I showed him the muddy handprint still smudged on the front door. He squinted at it, said it looked like just some smudge. I asked if it looked like a raccoon. He said I should get a dog. He left after that. I didn't sleep. I stayed on the couch with a flashlight and my hammer, twitching at every groan and creak of the house. Sometime around 3 a.m., the power flickered and my flashlight dimmed. Not died, just dimmed, like the batteries were being slowly drained. Then I saw it. Through the back window, it was standing at the edge of the woods, in full moonlight, arms dangling. Its shoulders reached higher than its head. The face was long, too long, a stretched mask of skin pulled taut over something that wasn't a skull, not anymore. Its mouth hung open like it had never learned how to close it. It lifted a finger, one long black claw, and pointed at me. I didn't move. I couldn't. Then it smiled, not like a human, not even like a dog, just something that had seen a smile once and tried to mimic it. That's when the howling started again. High, twisting, a chorus, not just one. A dozen voices, layered over each other, echoing through the forest like a siren made of teeth. I dropped the hammer. I ran to the bathroom, locked the door, crawled into the tub, and cried. When morning came, I walked outside. The porch was covered in skulls. Not just animal ones. A mix. Squirrels, foxes, a fawn. Some of them were still wet. One was charred. Another still had a chunk of fur clinging to it. They'd been arranged in a spiral, leading to the front step, like a message, a countdown. I called Nolan. Didn't even wait to say hello, just... It came back, I think I made it mad. There was a pause on the other end, then he sighed. You moved the bones? I nodded like he could see me. Once with a stick. The second time I tossed it. Another pause. You need to feed it. I didn't know what that meant, not at first. You owe it something now, he said. You disturbed the path, broke the order. That means it sees you, and when they see you, they want you. What is it? He didn't answer, just said, come to the shop, I'll tell you what to do. The drive to town felt like years. Trees blurred by, and I kept catching movement in the rearview mirror. Not cars, not animals. Something running alongside me just out of frame. When I pulled into the gravel lot behind Nolan's store, he was already outside, smoking, pacing. He handed me a grocery bag, slick and wet. Inside were raw steaks, bloody, reeking. You're gonna walk 10 minutes up the trail at sunset. Lay these down on the dirt. Don't say a word. Don't look back. No matter what you hear, feel, or think you see. You walk home, you lock your doors, and you wait. That's it? I asked, clutching the bag like it might bite me. That's your apology, he said. Won't fix what you did, but it might buy you a little time. I waited until sundown. The woods were colder than usual. Dead quiet, no insects, no birds. Even the wind felt muffled. I walked past marker 7 and kept going. 10 minutes in, I stopped at a clearing just off the trail, laid the stakes on the ground, backed up slowly. Then I heard it, breathing, fast, hungry, wet, followed by something heavy crashing through the undergrowth. Then a laugh. It started right behind me. Then it multiplied. Laughter from every direction. High-pitched, croaking giggles and gurgling chuckles that made my teeth ache. I walked faster, then ran. The sounds followed. Something thumped through the brush beside me, matching pace. I could feel it, hot breath on the back of my neck, twigs snapping inches from my heels. But I didn't look, not once. When I burst through the tree line and reached the porch, I turned the handle, slammed the door, and locked it. Something slammed into the wood hard enough to knock the pictures off my walls. It didn't stop for hours. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the front window with my hammer again, watching, waiting. Sometime near dawn, the forest quieted, and then it stepped onto the porch. Not the creature, a skull, just one, placed neatly at the center of the welcome mat. But this one had a name carved into it. Mine. The skull with my name carved into it didn't bleed, but I swear I could still smell the iron. It was fresh, not boneyard dry like the others. The letters were carved deep, John, rough and jagged, like whatever did it had claws instead of fingers. I left it on the porch and drove straight to town, running 2 red lights and nearly skidding out on the gravel at the bottom of the hill. I didn't stop at my usual spots. I didn't even glance at the gas station. I went straight to Nolan. When he opened the door and saw me, he didn't look surprised. He didn't even ask. They gave you a name skull, didn't they? I nodded, jaw locked, knuckles white on the steering wheel. That means they're keeping track. You're marked now. That's not a warning anymore. That's a countdown. There's a term the locals use, hollow ones. They don't call them skinwalkers or wendigos or demons, just hollow ones. Because that's what they are, empty. Vessels for something that doesn't belong in this world. Things that slip through when the veil thins. Old forest spirits turned feral, or maybe something older than spirits. Whatever they are, they collect, not for food, not for trophies, just to collect. Skulls, bones, names, souls, maybe. Nolan told me they've been showing up for centuries, usually when someone breaks the rule. Sometimes it's a hiker, sometimes it's a hunter, sometimes, like this time, it's a dumb city transplant who thinks he's found peace in a place that doesn't want him. The hollow ones don't always come in numbers, but when they do, it means they're preparing for a harvest. And I kicked the damn door open for them. The town held a meeting that night at the diner. It wasn't advertised. No one posted flyers. People just knew to come. There were maybe 24 of us in total. Men with rifles. Women with revolvers tucked into their coats. Even the priest was there, holding a box of shotgun shells and a bottle of holy water like they were equally sacred. Nolan stood at the head of the room. "Last time this happened," he said, "we lost 4 people. 3 never came back. 1 did, but not all of him." No one laughed. No one asked for details. He pointed at me. He opened the door, but we're all gonna pay for it. The room didn't argue. They started handing out weapons. I got a sawed-off 12-gauge and a bandolier of shells with carvings on each slug. Crosses, runes, symbols I didn't recognize. One woman, Ruth, handed me a flask and told me to drink. It tasted like ash and burned all the way down. "For protection," she said, "and to make you smell wrong to them." "What happens if it doesn't work?" I asked. "Then you'll scream less when they drag you." We headed out before sunset. The forest didn't wait. Halfway up the trail, the birds stopped. Then the wind died, and then the trees began to groan, not from wind, but from pressure, like something massive was pressing down on the whole mountain. We set up a perimeter near the clearing past mile marker 7, 6 men and women to a ring, the priest in the center murmuring over a makeshift altar made of stone and bone. And then we heard it. Laughter, not from one direction, from all of them. High-pitched, too human to be animal, too wrong to be human. Some laughed in gasps, others mimicked cries for help. Then the lights died. Flashlights blinked out, lanterns guttered. The fire pit blew cold in a split second. They were here. The first one we saw was tall, 8 feet, easy, thin as a scarecrow, arms dangling to the knees, skin like ash bark, a skull for a face, but not worn like a mask, fused to it, bone where cheeks should be, empty sockets leaking black. Ruth shot first. The blast shredded the thing's chest, but it didn't fall, just screamed, the sound like a train screeching against metal, and charged. It took 4 people to bring it down, 2 shotgun blasts, a hatchet to the neck, and Nolan emptying a revolver into its back. It melted, not like flesh, like candle wax, dripping into the dirt and hissing as it vanished. The others came after that, fast, loud, hundreds of footsteps pounding through the underbrush, shapes flashing between trees, crawling, leaping, dragging twisted limbs behind them. Some ran on all 4s, some walked like humans. One slithered. All of them had faces like cracked porcelain and jaws too wide. We fought. It wasn't war, it was survival. Bullets tore through the trees. The priest screamed until something dragged him away mid-prayer. Someone else got taken up into the trees so fast they didn't even get to fire a shot. I saw Nolan go down. One of the creatures leapt onto him, tore into his shoulder with a mouthful of glass-like teeth. I got there just in time to shoot it off him. He was bleeding bad. "Don't stop," he said. "Don't let them get behind you." I dragged him toward the center of the clearing where the altar had been, but it was gone now, just shattered stone and blood. All around us, the Hollow Ones laughed. It wasn't just a hunt, it was a game to them. They pushed us back, herded us, cornered us like cattle. One by one the others fell. Some vanished in a blink. Some didn't even scream. I fired until I ran out of shells. Nolan handed me his last one. "This won't kill them," he whispered, "but it'll make them think twice." Then he shoved me, into the trees, down the slope. I tumbled through brush and blood and mud until I hit a ditch. When I looked back, Nolan was standing alone, hands raised, staring down 3 of them as they circled. He never cried out, just stood there, silent, until they swallowed him whole. I ran. Through the forest, past the skulls, past mile marker 7, past my own porch. I didn't stop until I hit the road, until I reached my car. I didn't drive home. I went back to town, back to the diner. There were 5 of us left, just 5. All of us silent, bleeding, staring at our hands like they belonged to someone else. Someone laid out a map. Another grabbed salt. Someone else began carving fresh rounds. "We're going back out tonight. We have to." Because the forest didn't just whisper this time. It screamed. I haven't seen Nolan since that night. But sometimes, when I wake up with the taste of ash in my mouth and blood on the soles of my feet, I wonder if he made it. If maybe, somehow, he struck a deal, or became something worse. The town is quieter now. Fewer people walk the trail. And those who do, they know the rule. Don't touch the skulls, because the Hollow Ones are still out there. and they're still collecting. It had been a long weekend at my sister's place, and though I'd cherished every moment, exhaustion had finally settled into my bones. Emma and Mason, my two little bundles of restless energy, had been bouncing off the walls all day. Now, trapped in our cramped sedan, their bickering had reached a boiling point. "Emma, stop touching me!" Mason shrieked, his voice shrill enough to make my temples throb. "I'm not even touching you," Emma shot back, her tone equally indignant. "Guys, enough!" My voice cracked slightly, betraying my frayed nerves. Taking a deep breath, I reluctantly signaled and pulled off to the gravel shoulder of the isolated highway, nestled deep within the Appalachian countryside. The fading daylight cast a murky glow over the dense forests that lined the road, trees standing like dark sentinels guarding ancient secrets. Twisting around, I fixed them with my sternest mom stare. "If you two don't settle down right now, there won't be any screens for a week. Do you understand me?" They fell into sullen silence, and I closed my eyes briefly, pinching the bridge of my nose to ease the building headache. That was when I noticed it, a soft, distant hum of an approaching engine. My eyes flickered to the rearview mirror, catching headlights weaving slowly through the dusk, drawing nearer at an oddly cautious pace. Instinctively, I straightened up, alertness prickling down my spine. The car, an old sedan with a faded blue paint job, slowed to a stop alongside ours, passenger window lowering with a tired mechanical whine. Inside sat a middle-aged couple, their faces illuminated by the dim glow from the dash. The woman leaned slightly toward the open window, her pale face bearing an amiable smile beneath eyes that were oddly vacant, distant even. "Evening," she called out, her voice cheerful but hollow, like rehearsed friendliness. "Thought we should warn you. There's a nasty accident just ahead, over the hill. Traffic's completely backed up." Beside her, the man stared forward silently, barely blinking, his thin lips slightly parted. He hadn't moved or glanced in my direction since they stopped, and his unnatural stillness sent goosebumps skittering across my arms. "Oh," I managed, trying not to reveal my unease. "Thank you." The woman's smile widened slightly, becoming almost forced. "There's a little road right up here," she continued, pointing vaguely toward the shadowy woods behind her. "It'll take you right around the wreck. You'll get home faster that way." Something about her overly helpful tone twisted my gut. "That's very kind," I said, masking hesitation. "I appreciate the warning." For the briefest moment, her eyes hardened, an icy glint replacing the forced warmth. Then, almost immediately, she returned to her too friendly demeanor. "Just trying to help. Drive safely." They pulled away slowly, gravel crunching softly beneath their tires. My breath came shakily as their taillights vanished down the road, leaving me sitting in unnerving silence. Emma and Mason had fallen unusually quiet, their small faces pale in the dim interior. "Mommy," Emma whispered uncertainly. "Those people were weird." I forced a reassuring smile. "Just trying to be helpful, sweetie." But as I pulled back onto the main road, doubt gnawed at my mind. The suggested detour appeared just up ahead, a narrow, unpaved road diving sharply into the dense forest, its entrance swallowed by thickening shadows. My pulse quickened as I neared it, eyes involuntarily drawn to the looming darkened woods. Then I saw them again. Their car sat idly by the roadside, awkwardly parked half-hidden among tall, blackened trees. Both occupants stood silently beside the vehicle, shoulders rigid, eyes locked unblinkingly onto something unseen deep within the tangled forest. Their postures were unsettlingly stiff, almost unnatural. Neither acknowledged my slow passage. It was as if I didn't exist. My stomach twisted sharply, panic fluttering up my throat as I quickly pressed harder on the gas pedal. The road unfolded silently beneath me, trees blurring past. Only when miles stretched between us did I release my breath, realizing I'd been holding it all this time. That night, safe at home, sleep eluded me. Every shadow reminded me of those strange, lifeless stares, the unnatural stillness, and the way they'd waited silently, expectantly, at the mouth of that forgotten road. A road that seemed to lead nowhere but darkness. Morning sunlight painted a deceptive warmth over the countryside, pushing back the terrors of the night before. Yet, a lingering unease refused to fade. After dropping Emma and Mason at school, kissing them a bit too long, holding them a bit too tightly, I found myself drawn inexplicably back toward that isolated stretch of road. My heart beat faster as familiar landmarks blurred past, anxiety simmering beneath my skin. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that daylight would make my fears vanish. But as the narrow road came into view, dread returned with suffocating strength. Slowing down, I peered carefully toward the roadside, my pulse hammering like a trapped bird against my rib cage. A rusted metal sign emerged from behind thick brush, partially concealed and leaning precariously. My breath caught sharply. Dead end. I swallowed hard, guiding my car carefully onto the shoulder, gravel crunching softly beneath my tires. For a long moment, I just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. The memory of the couple's vacant stares and rigid postures was vivid, haunting. The compulsion to understand, to unravel this unsettling mystery, proved stronger than my fear. Reluctantly, I stepped out, my shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth, damp from the morning dew. The woods surrounding me felt oppressive, their thick branches forming a natural tunnel that seemed to suck the sunlight away. An unnatural silence enveloped everything. Not a bird chirped, nor leaves rustled. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. Taking cautious steps toward the dead-end sign, I noticed faint tire marks in the gravel. Beside them were clearer footprints, fresh imprints leading from where the car had parked toward the impenetrable darkness of the woods. The couple had walked straight into the trees, leaving no trail beyond the initial line of trees, as if they'd simply dissolved into the shadowed depths. My pulse quickened as I followed the footprints to the tree line, peering into the tangled, shadow-filled thicket. Something unsettlingly large had recently passed through here. Branches were snapped at unnatural angles, bark freshly torn. A chill prickled along my spine as my eyes caught sight of something on the forest floor. Shattered glass and rusty, twisted metal half buried in fallen leaves, hinting ominously at long-forgotten violence. Suddenly, a faint, nauseating odor curled through the air, a smell of rot, damp earth, and something darker, coppery, unmistakably familiar. Blood. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over roots hidden beneath the grass. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding my veins as panic threatened to overtake me. Whirling around, desperate to return to my car, I froze. From deep within the shadowy woods, barely visible but unmistakable, stood two figures. My throat tightened painfully, heart pounding as if ready to burst from my chest. The couple stood motionless, staring directly at me through gaps between twisted trunks, their pale, expressionless faces half hidden in the shadows. It was impossible. They couldn't have been standing there unnoticed all this time, yet there they were, unblinking, statuesque, their eyes gleaming dully like marbles in the gloom. A sudden whisper drifted from the darkness, a low, rasping sound that crawled over my skin like spider legs. My blood ran cold. It was not a language I recognized, just unintelligible murmurs that filled the silence with malicious intent. Terrified, I forced myself to turn away, stumbling back to my car on numb legs, certain that any moment I'd feel a cold hand grip my shoulder or hear footsteps chasing me. The door slammed shut behind me, and I quickly twisted the key, the engine roaring to life, a lifeline anchoring me back to reality. Glancing in the rearview mirror, my blood froze one final time. The figures had moved forward, closer to the road's edge, still unmoving, still staring. I peeled away, tires scattering gravel, heart hammering in chaotic rhythm. I vowed silently never to return to this cursed road again. Yet even now, 15 years later, their lifeless faces still haunt me in nightmares, whispering from the darkened woods, waiting patiently, endlessly waiting, for another unfortunate soul to follow them into the shadows.